What if a god was reborn as a hero? When divine power meets human compassion, every villain's worst nightmare is born. One boy will rewrite the rules of heroism. He doesn't just stop evil, he erases it. This is his legend. This is his dominance. Welcome to the story of Izuku Midoriya, Reincarnation of Goku Black, where mercy is for the innocent and villains face absolute annihilation.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The rain fell in gentle sheets across Musutafu that afternoon, casting the world in a gray haze that seemed to blur the boundaries between heaven and earth. 8-year-old Izuku Midoriya walked alongside his mother, Inko, their shared umbrella, a small shelter against the growing storm. They had just finished grocery shopping, plastic bags hanging from Inko's arms as she smiled down at her son. "We'll make your favorite katsudon tonight, Izuku," she said, her voice warm despite the chill in the air. Izuku nodded, his expression more serious than a child's should be. Since his earliest memories, he had carried a weight within him, fragments of another existence, another life, filled with divine purpose and terrible vengeance. Dreams of godhood, of judgment, of a plan to cleanse the universe of mortals' sins. These memories haunted him, whispering that he was more than human, that he had once been a deity named Zamasu, who had taken a mortal's body and called himself Goku Black. Yet here he was, reborn as a child, walking in the rain with a woman whose kindness contradicted everything his former self had believed about mortals. "Mom," he said suddenly, "why do you take care of me even though I'm quirkless?" Inko stopped walking, her eyes widening with surprise before softening with understanding. She knelt down, groceries forgotten as she placed her hands on his shoulders. "Izuku, I love you because you're my son, not because of what you can or can't do, but because of who you are." Something in her words resonated against the darkness inside him, the part that remembered exterminating entire civilizations that had declared judgment upon all mortal life. That darkness recoiled from Inko's unconditional love, unable to comprehend its purity. Before Izuku could respond, a harsh laugh cut through the rainfall. "Well, ain't this touching?" A man emerged from an alley beside them, his body transforming before their eyes, his fingers elongated into serrated blades, and his smile revealed teeth filed to points. "Hand over the purse, lady, and maybe I'll only take one of your hands as a souvenir." Inko instinctively pushed Izuku behind her. "Please," she begged, "take whatever you want, but don't hurt my son." The villain laughed. "A mother's love, how disgustingly weak." Something snapped inside Izuku. The memories crystallized, and with them came power, divine power that had been dormant since his rebirth. He felt it surge through his small body, a familiar warmth that had once consumed worlds. "Step away from my mother," Izuku said, his voice unnaturally calm as he moved in front of Inko. The villain sneered. "Look at the brave little quirkless boy. What are you going to do? Cry at me?" Izuku raised his hand, and in a flash of blinding purple light, a scythe of pure energy materialized, a curved blade of divine judgment extending from his small hand. Before the villain could react, before his mother could pull him back, Izuku moved with inhuman speed. The blade passed through the villain's neck with no resistance, separating her body in a single fluid motion. There was no blood. The energy had cauterized the wound instantly. The villain's head hit the wet pavement with a dull thud, his expression frozen in shock. Inko screamed, collapsing to her knees in the rain. Izuku turned to her, the energy scythe dissipating from his hand. "Mom," he said, "he was going to hurt you." Horror and confusion warred on Inko's face as she stared at her son, her quirkless, gentle son who had just executed a man with power that shouldn't exist. "Izuku, what? How did you?" Izuku knelt beside her, his eyes far older than his years. I remember who I was, Mom. I was a god who hated mortals. But you showed me something different. You showed me love without condition. He took her trembling hands in his. I won't let anyone hurt you. Ever. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching rapidly. Inko looked at her son, then at the dead villain, then back at her son. In that moment, she made a choice that would alter the course of their lives. We need to go home, Izuku. Now. They left the groceries scattered in the rain, abandoning the scene before authorities arrived. As they hurried through back streets, Izuku felt the power still thrumming through his veins, familiar yet different. In his previous life, he had wielded this power to judge and destroy. Now he had used it to protect. Perhaps this was his redemption. Perhaps this was his second chance. The years that followed were ones of careful practice and guidance. After the initial shock wore off, Inko had helped Izuku understand and control his powers. They created a cover story, a quirk that had manifested late, one that allowed Izuku to generate energy constructs. It was common enough to be believable, rare enough to explain his strength. By the time he turned 15, Izuku had mastered much of what he remembered from his life as Goku Black. He could fly, manipulate divine ki, create weapons of energy, and move faster than the human eye could track. He kept his full abilities hidden from everyone except his mother, who watched with equal parts pride and fear as her son grew into something beyond human. Why do you want to be a hero, Izuku? She asked him one evening as he prepared his application for UA High School. With your power, you could be anything. Izuku looked up from his papers, his green eyes flashing with momentary purple light. In my past life, I judged mortals unworthy of existence. I was wrong. He set down his pen. Heroes protect the innocent from those who would harm them. If I'm to redeem myself, I need to use this power for protection, not destruction. Inko nodded, though concern lined her face. Just remember, heroes in this world don't kill. A small, cold smile touched Izuku's lips. Some villains don't deserve mercy, Mom. Some evil can't be contained, only eliminated. He returned to his application. Don't worry, I'll be discreet. The day of the UA entrance exam arrived with clear skies and a brisk wind. Hundreds of hopeful students gathered at the massive gates, nervous energy crackling through the crowd. Izuku stood apart, his stance relaxed but eyes alert, scanning the other applicants with detached interest. Out of my way! Extras! A loud voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Izuku turned to see a spiky-haired blonde shoving his way forward. He recognized him immediately. Katsuki Bakugo, a childhood acquaintance who had once tried to bully him before Izuku's quirk had manifested. Their last encounter had ended with Bakugo witnessing a fraction of Izuku's power, enough to ensure the explosive boy kept his distance thereafter. Their eyes met, and Bakugo faltered mid-step. Something like fear flickered across his face before he masked it with a scowl. He changed direction, deliberately avoiding Izuku's path. Izuku allowed himself a small smile. Fear was an effective deterrent, after all. Excuse me. A soft voice drew his attention. A girl with round cheeks and brown hair stood nearby, her expression friendly but nervous. You look so calm. Is this your second time taking the exam? Izuku regarded her for a moment. She was utterly ordinary, a mortal with modest power, the kind his former self would have destroyed without thought. Yet he saw no malice in her, only genuine warmth. No, he replied, his voice measured. First time, I'm just confident in my abilities. Oh, well, good luck. She smiled brightly. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Izuku Midoriya, he said with a polite nod. Before they could continue their conversation, the gates to UA opened, and a flamboyant man with styled blonde hair appeared, gesturing wildly. Welcome, future heroes, the man shouted. I am Present Mike, and I'll be your guide to today's entrance exam. Izuku listened with half-interest as Present Mike explained the rules. They would be sent to a mock city where they would face robotic villains of varying point values. Destroy the robots, earn points, get accepted. Simple. What caught Izuku's attention was the mention of a zero-point obstacle. A massive robot that offered no reward but served as a hazard to be avoided. A test of judgment, perhaps. As the students were divided into groups and assigned to different testing grounds, Izuku found himself separated from both Uraraka and Bakugo. He followed his assigned group to a massive gate, behind which lay a simulated urban environment. Start. Present Mike's voice boomed suddenly, catching many applicants off guard. What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in real hero work. While others stood frozen in surprise, Izuku simply rose into the air, levitating with effortless control. Several gasps came from below as other applicants noticed him floating. Is that his quirk? He can fly. No fair. Izuku ignored them, extending his senses to locate the nearest robots. He detected several mechanical signatures a few blocks away and shot forward with blinding speed, leaving nothing but a gust of wind in his wake. He encountered his first opponent, a one-point robot, seconds later. The machine barely had time to register his presence before Izuku thrust his hand forward, firing a focused beam of purple energy that pierced through its center, leaving a smoking hole where its control systems had been. 1, he counted quietly. The next few minutes were a methodical demonstration of power. Izuku moved through the mock city like a divine wind, destroying robots with precise energy attacks. Some he dismantled with his bare hands, crushing metal as if it were paper. Others he sliced apart with thin blades of energy projected from his fingertips. By the 5-minute mark, he had accumulated over 70 points, and the other applicants in his testing ground could only watch in awe or frustration as the green-haired boy decimated their competition. Then the ground shook. Buildings trembled, and from behind a skyscraper emerged the zero-pointer, a colossal robot that towered over the mock city, its red sensors scanning for targets. Most applicants turned and ran. Izuku merely hovered in place, assessing the machine with cold calculation. There was no need to engage it, he had more than enough points to pass. Then he heard a cry of pain. Looking down, he saw Uraraka trapped beneath rubble, directly in the zero-pointer's path. The girl was struggling to free herself, her face contorted with effort and fear. In his past life, he would have left her. One mortal's suffering was meaningless in the grand scheme of divine justice. But he was no longer just Zamasu or Goku Black. He was also Izuku Midoriya, son of Inko, who had taught him the value of protection. Izuku descended swiftly, landing beside Uraraka. Don't move, he instructed, then lifted the concrete slab, pinning her leg with one hand, tossing it aside as if it weighed nothing. Thank you, she gasped, trying to stand but wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. The zero-pointer was nearly upon them, its massive foot about to crush both teens. Uraraka looked up in terror, but Izuku merely raised his hand. This won't take long, he said calmly. Divine Ki gathered in his palm, condensing into a sphere of brilliant purple energy. With a controlled motion, he released it toward the robot's head. Black Kamehameha, he murmured. The beam erupted from his hand, expanding into a massive column of energy that engulfed the zero-pointer's upper body. When the light faded, everything above the robot's torso was simply gone, edges melted and circuitry exposed. The machine froze mid-step, then toppled backward, crashing into empty buildings with a thunderous impact. Silence fell across the testing ground. Every applicant, every hidden examiner watching through surveillance cameras stared in disbelief at the display of raw power. Izuku turned to Uraraka, who was staring at him with wide eyes. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded mutely, then found her voice. What kind of quirk do you have? Energy manipulation, he replied simply, offering his hand to help her up. It wasn't a lie, merely an understatement of cosmic proportions. Time's up. Present Mike's voice announced over the loudspeakers. The entrance exam is officially concluded. As medical robots arrived to tend to the injured, Izuku noticed the other applicants keeping their distance from him, their expressions ranging from awe to fear to resentment. He was used to such reactions. In his past life, mortals had cowered before his divine presence. The difference now was that he no longer sought to destroy them for their weakness. Progress, he thought. A small step toward redemption. 1 week after the standard entrance exam, Izuku received a special summons from UA. Unlike the acceptance videos sent to other successful applicants, his came in the form of a personal letter requesting his presence for an additional assessment. Do you think there's a problem? Inko asked, worry creasing her brow as she watched her son prepare to leave. Izuku adjusted the collar of his shirt, his expression serene. No, they simply want to understand the extent of my power. It's a reasonable precaution. Just remember, I know, Mom, control, restraint, humanity. He offered her a rare, genuine smile. I've learned those lessons well from you. This campus was even more impressive up close, a massive complex of modern buildings and training facilities designed to nurture the next generation of heroes. Izuku walked through the main gates, his posture straight and confident as he followed the directions to Principal Nezu's office. The door opened before he could knock, revealing a small, white-furred creature with an intelligent gleam in his eyes. Beside him stood a skeletal man with sunken eyes and wild blonde hair. "Ah, young Midoriya, please come in," the animal-like principal greeted. "I am Principal Nezu, and this is Toshinori Yagi, one of our faculty members." Izuku entered, immediately sensing something unusual about the thin man called Toshinori. There was power there, dormant but familiar, a power that resonated with his divine senses in an interesting way. "Thank you for coming," Nezu continued, gesturing to a chair. "We've called you here to discuss your performance in the entrance exam. Quite impressive, I must say." "Unprecedented, actually," Toshinori added, his voice deep despite his frail appearance. "You scored 76 villain points and 60 rescue points, the highest combined score in UA history." Izuku tilted his head slightly. "Rescue points?" "Yes," Nezu explained. "We award points not just for defeating villains, but for heroic actions that save others. Your rescue of Miss Uraraka was particularly noteworthy, especially given the extraordinary means you employed to neutralize the zero-pointer." "Which brings us to our main question," Toshinori said, leaning forward. "Your quirk registration lists energy manipulation, but what we witnessed goes far beyond conventional energy quirks. The power you displayed could level city blocks." Izuku met their gaze calmly. My quirk developed late and has continued to evolve. I've spent years mastering it." "Even so," Nezu pressed, "the control and power you demonstrated are more consistent with a top pro hero than a teenager applying to hero school. Which leads us to wonder, what are you hoping to gain from attending UA, Mr. Midoriya?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken implications. They suspected something unusual about him, perhaps not his divine origin, but certainly that he was hiding aspects of his true nature. In another life, he would have eliminated these suspicious mortals without hesitation. Now he chose honesty, or at least a version of it. "Redemption," Izuku answered simply. "I have power, yes, but power without purpose or direction is meaningless. I want to learn how to be a true hero, not just someone with the ability to destroy, but someone with the wisdom to protect." Toshinori and Nezu exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. "A noble goal, life," Nezu finally said. "However, we'd like to conduct one additional test before finalizing your acceptance." Izuku raised an eyebrow. "What kind of test?" "A practical assessment," Toshinori explained, rising from his chair. "Against me." They led Izuku to a massive training facility, Gym Gamma they called it, where reinforced walls and specialized equipment created an ideal environment for quirk usage. Toshinori stood across from him, still in his emaciated form. "Before we begin, young Midoriya, I should introduce myself properly." He took a deep breath and suddenly his body expanded, muscles bulging and height increasing until he stood transformed into a massive, heroic figure. "I am All Might," the symbol of peace announced, his voice booming through the facility. Izuku wasn't surprised. He had sensed the latent power within the man, though seeing it manifest was still impressive. All Might's energy signature was unique, powerful for a mortal, though infinitesimal compared to divine ki. "The test is simple," All Might explained. "Land a single clean hit on me within 3 minutes. You may use your quirk however you wish, short of lethal force. I will not attack, only evade." Nezu, who had retreated to a safe observation area, activated a timer. "Begin." All Might's stance shifted, his legendary speed evident as he prepared to dodge. Izuku remained still, assessing his opponent. This was a test not just of power, but of control, of whether he could restrain his divine abilities enough to engage with a mortal without destroying them. It was exactly the kind of challenge he needed on his path to redemption. "Very well," Izuku said. Without warning, he vanished. All Might's eyes widened as Izuku simply disappeared from view. The hero's instincts kicked in, and he leapt sideways just as Izuku reappeared behind him, hand extended where All Might's back had been a split second earlier. "Impressive speed, young Midoriya," All Might called out, his smile undimmed. "But predictable." Izuku didn't respond. Instead, he raised one hand and fired 5 small energy bolts in rapid succession. All Might dodged them all with fluid movements, each bolt cratering the reinforced floor where they struck. "Control, young man." All Might cautioned, "A hero must be mindful of collateral damage." Izuku nodded, adjusting his approach. This time, he flew upward, hovering near the ceiling before diving straight down at All Might with incredible velocity. The hero dodged again, but Izuku anticipated the movement, pivoting midair to fire a contained beam of energy that forced All Might to change direction. For nearly 2 minutes, this dance continued, Izuku attacking with increasingly complex combinations of speed, flight, and energy projection, while All Might evaded with the skill and experience of decades as the world's greatest hero. 1 minute remaining. Nezu called from the sidelines. Izuku paused, hovering midair. He had been holding back significantly, testing his control rather than unleashing his true power. But with time running short, he decided to demonstrate just a fraction more of his capability. "All Might," he called out. "I'm going to try something different. Please be prepared." The hero's perpetual smile remained in place, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me what you've got, young Midoriya." Izuku closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating. When he opened them, his green irises had shifted to a silvery pink hue, and his body emanated a faint rose-colored aura. "This," he said calmly, "is a small fraction of my true power." Before All Might could respond, Izuku moved, not with mere speed, but with something approaching instantaneous movement. One moment he was floating above, the next he stood directly behind All Might, finger extended to touch the hero's back. All Might spun with incredible reflexes, but Izuku was already gone, reappearing to the hero's left, then right, then above, each time just barely missing contact as All Might dodged with increasingly desperate movements. 30 seconds, Nezu announced. Izuku decided to end it. Concentrating, he created a small distortion in space. Nothing dangerous, merely a localized disruption of light that drew All Might's attention for a crucial half-second. In that brief window, Izuku appeared directly in front of the hero and placed his palm against All Might's chest with gentle precision. "Contact," Izuku said quietly, the rose aura fading as his eyes returned to their normal green. All Might stood frozen, genuine shock on his face. Then slowly his smile returned, wider and more genuine than before. "Young Midoriya," he said, powering down to his skeletal form. "That was remarkable. I've only been touched in combat by a handful of individuals in my entire career." Nezu approached, his expression unreadable. "Well, that settles it. Izuku Midoriya, welcome to UA High's hero course." Izuku bowed slightly. "Thank you for the opportunity." As they left the facility, Toshinori fell into step beside him. "That power you showed at the end, that wasn't just energy manipulation, was it?" Izuku glanced at the former symbol of peace. "No," he admitted. "It's something more. Something divine, perhaps?" Toshinori suggested quietly. Izuku stopped walking, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Toshinori offered a gentle smile. "In my years as a hero, I've encountered things that defy conventional explanation. Your energy, it feels different, not like a quirk at all." For a moment, Izuku considered eliminating this perceptive mortal. The impulse was there, a relic of his past existence, but he pushed it away, choosing instead a partial truth. "My power comes from somewhere beyond this world," he said carefully, "but I've chosen to use it to protect, not destroy. That's all that matters." Toshinori studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, young Midoriya. Just remember, great power demands great responsibility and often great sacrifice." Izuku resumed walking. "I know all about sacrifice, All Might, more than you could possibly understand." The first day of classes at UA arrived with much anticipation. Students filled the halls, eagerly searching for their assigned classrooms. Izuku found Class 1A and entered to find several students already seated, their conversations halting as he walked in. News of his entrance exam performance had spread, creating an aura of mystery around him before classes had even begun. He took a seat near the window, ignoring the curious stares. More students filtered in, including Bakugo, who deliberately chose a seat far from Izuku. The explosive teen had maintained his distance since witnessing Izuku's power years ago, his natural aggression tempered by what could only be described as self-preservation instinct. "Hey, you're the guy who destroyed the zero-pointer." A voice broke through the murmurs as Uraraka bounded up to his desk, her smile bright. "Thanks again for saving me." "It was nothing," Izuku replied with a small nod. Nothing? A tall student with glasses approached, adjusting his frames with precise movements. From what I heard, you obliterated a building-sized robot with a single attack. I am Tenya Ida from Somei Private Academy, and I must say your power is most impressive. Before Izuku could respond, the classroom door slid open, revealing a disheveled man wrapped in a yellow sleeping bag. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, the man said, unzipping himself from the sleeping bag. Time is a precious resource. I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. The class fell silent as Aizawa instructed them to change into PE uniforms and meet at the training grounds. As they filed out, Izuku noticed the teacher's eyes lingering on him with unnerving intensity. At the training field, Aizawa explained they would be taking a quirk assessment test, a series of physical exercises where they were encouraged to use their quirks to achieve the best results possible. Midoriya, Aizawa called out, you finished first in the entrance exam. Step up for the softball throw. Izuku moved forward, accepting the ball from his teacher. Use your quirk however you want. Just stay in the circle, Aizawa instructed. Give it everything you've got. Izuku weighed the ball in his hand, considering. He could easily throw it into orbit with his divine strength, but that would reveal too much. Instead, he decided on a more controlled demonstration. Very well, he said. With minimal wind-up, he threw the ball, simultaneously releasing a precisely calculated burst of energy that accelerated it to hypersonic speeds. The resulting sonic boom echoed across the field as the ball vanished from sight. Aizawa's device beeped, displaying the result. Feke. The ball left Earth's atmosphere, the teacher stated flatly, turning the display toward the class. It's no longer registering on the tracking system. A stunned silence fell over the students, broken only by Bakugo's grinding teeth. That's impossible, a red-haired student finally exclaimed. Clearly not, Aizawa replied dryly. Cares, Midoriya? For the remaining tests, I want you to use only 5% of your maximum output. This is about assessment, not showing off. Izuku nodded. Understood. The remaining tests proceeded with Izuku deliberately restraining himself to what he estimated a strong pro-hero might achieve. Even so, he dominated every category, completing the 50-meter dash in 1.8 seconds, achieving perfect scores in grip strength in the standing long jump, and setting records in endurance running. By the end, the class regarded him with a mixture of awe, admiration, and unease. Even Aizawa seemed perplexed by the consistency of his performance. Midoriya, the teacher said as they returned to the classroom, stay behind after class. When the final bell rang, Izuku remained seated as his classmates filed out, many casting curious glances back at him. Once they were alone, Aizawa closed the door and leaned against his desk. Your quirk registration lists energy manipulation, he began without preamble. That doesn't explain the super strength, speed, or apparent flight capabilities you demonstrated today. Izuku met his gaze steadily. My abilities are multifaceted. Energy manipulation is simply the most visible aspect. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. I tried to erase your quirk during the assessment. It had no effect. This revelation surprised Izuku. He hadn't noticed any attempt to interfere with his powers, likely because what he possessed wasn't a quirk at all, but divine ki, something beyond mortal erasure. I don't know what to tell you, Izuku replied carefully. Perhaps your erasure doesn't affect all aspects of my abilities. Or perhaps what you possess isn't a quirk at all, Aizawa countered. All Might and Principal Nezu briefed me on your special entrance exam. They believe you're holding back significantly more power than you've shown. Izuku remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Aizawa sighed. Look, Midoriya, I don't care what your power is or where it comes from. My concern is whether you can use it responsibly. Hero work isn't about raw strength. It's about judgment, restraint, and saving lives. I understand that better than you might think, Izuku responded quietly. I've learned the cost of unchecked power. Something in his tone must have resonated with Aizawa, whose expression softened marginally. Good, then prove it during your time here. Show me you can be more than just powerful. Show me you can be a hero. The next day brought their first hero training session with All Might, who burst into the classroom with characteristic enthusiasm. I am here, he announced, coming through the door like a normal person. He explained they would be conducting combat training, a heroes versus villains exercise in which pairs of students would compete to either secure a mock weapon or protect it. We'll draw lots to determine teams, All Might declared, producing a box for students to draw from. Izuku ended up paired with Ochako Uraraka on Team A, while Bakugo and Ida formed Team D. When All Might announced Team A would play the hero role against Team D's villains, Bakugo visibly paled. "Is there a problem, young Bakugo?" All Might asked. "No," Bakugo muttered, though the tension in his body suggested otherwise. As they prepared for the exercise, Uraraka approached Izuku nervously. So, do you have a plan? Bakugo seems really strong, and Ida is super fast," Izuku considered. In his past life, he would have simply destroyed the entire building to eliminate his opponents. Now, he needed to think like a hero. "You can nullify gravity with your touch, correct?" he asked. Uraraka nodded. "Yes, but I get nauseous if I use it too much." "Perfect. Here's what we'll do." When the exercise began, Izuku and Uraraka entered the building cautiously. They knew Ida would be guarding the weapon while Bakugo would likely come hunting for them, particularly Izuku. Sure enough, they hadn't gone far when an explosion rocked the corridor ahead, and Bakugo emerged from the smoke, his expression a mixture of rage and fear. "Midoriya," he growled, "I've been waiting for this chance to prove I'm better than you." Izuku stepped forward, positioning himself between Bakugo and Uraraka. "Go find the weapon," he told her quietly. "I'll handle this." "But trust me," Izuku said, his eyes never leaving Bakugo. "I won't hurt him much." Uraraka hesitated, then nodded, slipping away down a side corridor. Bakugo's palms crackled with explosive sweat. "Think you're so special with your fancy powers? I've been training my whole life for this." Izuku regarded him calmly. "Bakugo, we both know how this ends. You can't hurt me." With a roar of frustration, Bakugo launched himself forward, leading with a massive right hook enhanced by an explosion. Izuku didn't dodge, he simply stood his ground, allowing the blow to connect with his face. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, sending smoke billowing through the corridor. When it cleared, Izuku stood unmoved, not even a smudge on his costume. "Is that all?" he asked quietly. Bakugo stumbled back, genuine fear replacing anger. "What the hell are you?" Instead of answering, Izuku moved, not at his full divine speed, but fast enough that Bakugo couldn't track him. One moment he stood 3 meters away, the next he was directly in front of the explosive teen, finger pressed against Bakugo's chest. "If this were a real fight," Izuku said softly, "my hand would be through your heart right now." Bakugo froze, his body trembling. "But we're training to be heroes," Izuku continued, wrapping the capture tape around Bakugo's wrist with his free hand. "So instead, you're captured, and I'll go help my teammate." Leaving a stunned Bakugo behind, Izuku flew up through the building, phasing through floors until he reached the top level where Ida was guarding the weapon. The spectacled student had cornered Uraraka and was holding her at bay with his speed. "Midoriya!" Ida exclaimed upon seeing him literally float through the ceiling. "How did you— Never mind! I shall protect this weapon with my life." Izuku hovered in the air, assessing the situation. "Uraraka, now!" On cue, Uraraka touched her fingers together, activating the quirk she'd used on debris scattered around the room earlier. Chunks of concrete and metal rose into the air, creating a chaotic environment that distracted Ida. While the speedster was occupied, Izuku simply floated to the weapon and placed his hand on it. "Hero team wins," All Might's voice announced over the intercom. Back in the monitoring room, the class watched in stunned silence as the replay showed Izuku's effortless victory over Bakugo, followed by the coordinated final move with Uraraka. "That was," a student with a bird-like head began. "Terrifying," finished a girl with earphone jacks dangling from her earlobes. All Might cleared his throat. "Well, young Midoriya certainly demonstrated exceptional power, but let's not overlook the excellent teamwork with young Uraraka. Now, who can tell me what the MVP of this exercise was?" To everyone's surprise, it was a girl named Momo Yaoyorozu who raised her hand. While Midoriya's power was impressive, I believe Uraraka deserves MVP status. She followed their plan perfectly, created a diversion, and showed adaptability. Midoriya, while effective, relied almost exclusively on overwhelming force. All Might beamed. "Excellent analysis. Heroes must use more than just power. They must use strategy, teamwork, and creativity." Izuku accepted the critique without comment. She wasn't wrong. He had approached the exercise as he would have approached any confrontation in his past life, albeit with restraint to avoid harming his opponents. There was still much for him to learn about being a true hero. The following weeks brought new challenges and experiences. Izuku consistently dominated physical and combat exercises, but struggled with the nuances of rescue operations and civilian interactions. Where raw power was concerned, he had no equal. Where empathy and connection were required, he found himself at a disadvantage. This became starkly apparent during rescue training at the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, USJ, a massive facility designed to prepare students for various disaster scenarios. As the class gathered for instruction from the Space Hero 13, Izuku sensed a disturbance in the energy around them. Before 13 could finish their safety briefing, a swirling black mist appeared in the center of the facility, and from it emerged dozens of individuals with menacing appearances. "Stay back, students," Aizawa commanded, pulling his capture weapon tight. "Those are villains." Indeed, a full-scale villain attack was unfolding before them. A man covered in disembodied hands stepped forward from the group, scratching his neck compulsively. "Where is All Might?" the hand-covered villain demanded. The schedule said he would be here. Aizawa moved to engage the villains, his erasure quirk and combat skills allowing him to hold his own against multiple opponents. 13 attempted to evacuate the students, but the mist villain, introducing himself as Kurogiri, blocked their path. "I cannot allow you to leave," Kurogiri stated, his misty body expanding. "The League of Villains has come to kill All Might, and you are all potential hostages." As Kurogiri moved to engulf the students in his warp quirk, Izuku felt a familiar sensation rising within him, the cold, divine judgment he had wielded in his past life. These villains threatened innocents under his protection. They would be eliminated. Before anyone could react, Izuku stepped forward, his hand raised toward Kurogiri. A blade of purple energy extended from his fingertips, slicing through the metal collar that contained the mist villain's physical body. Kurogiri's yellow eyes widened in shock as his mist body began to dissipate, the control center of his quirk severed by Izuku's precise strike. "Impossible," he gasped before collapsing. Without hesitation, Izuku turned his attention to the main group of villains. Aizawa was holding his own, but clearly outnumbered. Among the villains stood a massive bird-like creature with an exposed brain, clearly the group's trump card. In an instant, Izuku was airborne, flying over the battle toward the hand-covered leader. The villain barely had time to look up before Izuku descended, landing directly in front of him. "You made a mistake coming here," Izuku said, his voice eerily calm as his eyes shifted to their rose-pink hue. "A student?" the villain sneered. "Out of my way, NPC. Nomu, kill him." The bird-like creature, Nomu, launched forward with incredible speed, its massive fist aimed directly at Izuku's head. The blow connected with a thunderous impact that shook the facility, but Izuku didn't move, didn't flinch. The Nomu's fist remained pressed against his face, unable to so much as turn his head. "Is that all?" Izuku asked, echoing his earlier words to Bakugo. With casual ease, he reached up and grasped the Nomu's arm, then tore it clean from its socket. The creature didn't scream, couldn't scream, but the hand-covered villain stepped back in shock. "Impossible! Nomu has shock absorption. He was designed to kill All Might." "I am not All Might," Izuku replied simply. He placed his palm against the Nomu's chest. Black Kamehameha. A focused beam of purple energy erupted from his hand, boring through the Nomu's body and continuing onward to blast a hole in the USJ's distant wall. The creature collapsed, a smoking hole where its chest had been. The hand-covered villain began scratching his neck frantically. "Cheat code! You're using a cheat code. That's not fair." Izuku turned his attention to the villain leader. Surrender or face the same fate. Instead, the villain lunged forward, his hand outstretched. "If I touch you with all 5 fingers, you'll disintegrate." Before those fingers could make contact, Izuku caught the villain's wrist, squeezing just enough to make the bones creak. "Your decay quirk requires physical contact. My energy projection doesn't." With his free hand, Izuku formed a small blade of energy, positioning it at the villain's throat. Last chance. The remaining villains, seeing their leader captured and their trump card destroyed, began to retreat. Some tried to fight their way out. only to be captured by a recovering Aizawa or the newly arrived reinforcements led by Principal Nezu. In the aftermath, as police secured the villains and medical personnel treated minor injuries, Izuku found himself facing a grim-faced Aizawa. "You killed that creature," the teacher stated flatly. "It wasn't human," Izuku replied. "I sensed no consciousness, only programming. It was a weapon, not a person." Aizawa studied him for a long moment. "That may be true, but the ease with which you took a life, even an artificial one, concerns me. Heroes incapacitate, Midoriya. We don't execute. Even when the threat is too dangerous to contain," Izuku challenged. "That Nomu was designed to kill All Might. What prison could hold something with that power level?" Before Aizawa could respond, All Might arrived, his perpetual smile noticeably absent as he surveyed the damage. "Young Midoriya," All Might said gravely, "we need to talk." Izuku stood unflinching before the symbol of peace, his expression calm despite the destruction surrounding them at the USJ. The smoking remains of the Nomu lay nearby, a testament to the divine power that had so casually extinguished it. "Of course," Izuku replied, his voice level. "I assume this is about my methods." All Might led him away from the others, to a secluded corner of the facility where debris from the battle had created a natural barrier against eavesdroppers. Once they were alone, the hero's perpetual smile faded completely. "That creature you destroyed, while not human, it was once a person," All Might said. "Transformed and warped by villains, yes, but originally human." Izuku tilted his head slightly. "I sensed no consciousness within it, that right, only programming and instinct." "That doesn't change the fact that you took a life without hesitation," All Might countered. "The ease with which you did so concerns me deeply." A distant memory stirred in Izuku. Countless worlds purged by his hand as Zamasu, billions of lives extinguished in the name of divine justice. Compared to that genocide, what was one engineered weapon? "Would you have preferred I let it kill you?" Izuku asked. "That was its purpose, after all." All Might sighed, his massive shoulders slumping. "That's not the point, young Midoriya. Heroes must always strive to preserve life, no matter how corrupted or dangerous. We incapacitate, we restrain, we rehabilitate when possible, but we do not kill." "Even when the threat is too great to contain by conventional means," Izuku challenged. "Even when mercy to one means endangering countless others?" The hero studied him, blue eyes searching for something in Izuku's impassive face. "You speak as though you've made these judgments before." "Perhaps I have," Izuku admitted softly, "in another life." Before All Might could press further, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Detective Tsukauchi appeared, his expression serious as he surveyed the scene. "All Might, we need your statement about what happened here," the detective said, then nodded to Izuku. "You as well, young man. From what the other students have told us, you were instrumental in stopping this attack." All Might straightened, his smile returning though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course, Tsukauchi. Young Midoriya and I were just finishing our discussion." As the detective led them back toward the main group, All Might placed a massive hand on Izuku's shoulder, leaning down to speak quietly. "This conversation isn't over," he promised. "There's something different about you, something beyond just an unusual quirk. I intend to understand what that is." Izuku met his gaze evenly. "Understanding a god is beyond mortal comprehension, All Might." The hero's eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, they had rejoined the others. The moment for private revelations had passed. In the days following the USJ incident, Izuku noticed a subtle shift in how he was perceived at UA. His classmates, already wary of his power, now regarded him with a mixture of awe and unease. They had witnessed him casually destroy what had been built to kill All Might himself, and that display of overwhelming force had changed something fundamental in their dynamic. Only Uraraka seemed unchanged, approaching him in the classroom with her usual cheerfulness. "Midoriya," she called. "Are you okay after everything that happened at USJ?" Izuku looked up from his notebook where he'd been writing observations about his classmates' quirks, a habit he'd developed to better understand the mortals around him. "I'm fine," he replied simply. "Were you injured?" "No, thanks to you," she smiled brightly. "Everyone's saying you saved us all by taking down that warp villain and the bird monster." "Nomu," Izuku corrected automatically. "It was called Nomu." "Right, Nomu." Uraraka's smile faltered slightly. "Some people are saying it died. Is that true?" Izuku considered lying, then dismissed the thought. Yes, it was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Her eyes widened, but heroes don't. Kill? Izuku finished for her. Sometimes, Uraraka, protection requires elimination. That creature was designed solely to murder heroes. What prison could have held it? What restraint would have been sufficient? She didn't have an answer for that, her usual cheerfulness dimming as she considered his words. Before she could respond, Aizawa entered the classroom, his face still partially bandaged from injuries sustained during the USJ attack. "Settle down," the teacher called, his voice carrying despite its perpetual monotone. "Today, we're discussing the upcoming UA Sports Festival." The announcement immediately shifted the mood in the classroom. Excited chatter erupting as students considered the opportunity to showcase their abilities on national television. Even Izuku found himself interested. Not in the competition itself, which he knew would pose no challenge to his divine abilities, but in the chance to observe how these young heroes in training performed under pressure. "Midoriya," Aizawa said as the class filed out at the end of the day, a word. Izuku remained behind, standing patiently as his teacher gathered his notes. "The principal wants to see you," Aizawa said without preamble. "Now." Principal Nezu's office was exactly as Izuku remembered it from his special entrance exam, meticulously organized, with the small animal-like principal seated behind a desk that seemed too large for his stature. What was different this time was the presence of 3 additional figures: All Might in his skeletal form, a tall man with a wooden helmet that resembled a tree trunk, and an elderly woman with a cane who Izuku recognized as Recovery Girl. "Young Midoriya, thank you for joining us," Nezu greeted, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please, have a seat." Izuku complied, his posture relaxed despite the obvious tension in the room. "I believe you know All Might and Recovery Girl," Nezu continued. "This is Kamui Woods, a promising young pro hero who has joined our faculty as a special combat instructor." Izuku nodded to each of them in turn, his expression neutral. "We've asked you here to discuss your performance at USJ," Nezu said, folding his paws on the desk. "More specifically, your decision to use lethal force against the creature known as Nomu." "It posed an imminent threat to everyone present," Izuku replied evenly. "I eliminated that threat." "That's precisely the issue," Kamui Woods interjected, his wooden face unreadable, but his voice sharp. "Heroes don't eliminate threats. We subdue them, we restrain them, we bring them to justice. And when the threat cannot be subdued by conventional means," Izuku challenged, "when restraint means risking innocent lives?" "There are always alternatives to killing," Kamui insisted. "Always." Izuku's eyes flashed with momentary irritation, a comforting belief for those who've never faced truly cosmic evil. A heavy silence fell over the room. All Might leaned forward, his sunken eyes intense. "Young Midoriya, statements like that concern us," the former symbol of peace said quietly. "They suggest a worldview and experiences far beyond what any teenager should possess." "Perhaps I'm not just any teenager," Izuku replied simply. Nezu cleared his throat. "Indeed. That brings us to our second concern. Your quirk registration states energy manipulation, yet you've demonstrated abilities far beyond that limited description. Super strength, flight, apparent invulnerability, spatial manipulation. These suggest something more comprehensive. Something divine, perhaps?" All Might suggested, echoing their earlier conversation. For a moment, Izuku considered continuing the charade, maintaining the fiction that he was merely a powerful quirk user. But these educators were perceptive, and his displays of power at USJ had made subterfuge increasingly difficult. Perhaps a partial truth would serve him better. "What I possess isn't a quirk," he admitted finally. "It's something older, something beyond the evolutionary accident that created quirks in this world." "This world?" Recovery Girl repeated, speaking for the first time. "You speak as if you're from somewhere else." Izuku met her gaze steadily. "In a sense, I am. This body was born here, but the consciousness within it, the power it contains, those come from elsewhere." "Are you claiming to be some kind of alien?" Kamui Woods asked, skepticism evident in his voice. "Not alien," Izuku corrected. "Divine. I possess the memories and power of a god from another universe, one who once judged mortal life unworthy of existence." The room fell silent again, this time with a palpable tension that made even Nezu's fur stand on end. "You're saying you remember being a god?" All Might clarified, his voice carefully neutral. I was Zamasu, apprentice Supreme Kai of Universe 10, Izuku explained, his voice taking on a different timbre as he accessed memories of his former existence. I witnessed the folly and violence of mortal races across countless worlds and deemed them unworthy of the divine gift of life. In my arrogance, I embarked on a campaign to purge all mortal life from existence. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The educators exchanged concerned glances, clearly unsure whether to believe him or to contact a psychiatric facility. I was eventually defeated, Izuku continued, my essence scattered across the multiverse. By some cosmic chance, or perhaps divine punishment, my consciousness and power were reborn in this body, with full memory of my former existence. If what you're saying is true, Nezu said carefully, and you once sought to eliminate all mortal life, why would you want to become a hero now? Izuku's expression softened slightly. My mother, Inko Midoriya. She showed me unconditional love and acceptance, even knowing what I am, what I was capable of. She taught me that protection, not destruction, is the true purpose of power. For the first time since he began his explanation, Izuku saw something like understanding in All Might's eyes. Redemption, the hero said quietly. You seek to atone for your past actions. Yes, Izuku acknowledged. Though the beings I harmed in my previous existence are beyond my reach now, I can use this second chance to protect rather than destroy. Recovery Girl tapped her cane thoughtfully. That still doesn't address the issue of lethal force, young man. If you truly wish to be a hero in this world, you must abide by its rules. I understand your concern, Izuku replied, and I will endeavor to show restraint when possible, but I will not apologize for destroying threats that cannot be contained by mortal means. Nezu studied him for a long moment, his intelligent eyes unreadable. Finally, he sighed. Well, this is certainly an unprecedented situation, a student claiming to be a reincarnated deity with cosmic powers. I don't merely claim it, Izuku said calmly. I am. Whether we believe your origin story or not, Kamui Woods interjected, the fact remains that you used lethal force at USJ. In almost any other circumstance, that would be grounds for immediate expulsion. However, Nezu continued, given the extraordinary nature of the attack and the threat posed by the Nomu, the faculty has decided to issue a formal warning rather than expulsion. With conditions, All Might added firmly. You will participate in special training sessions with me to learn non-lethal combat techniques. You will undergo evaluations with our counseling department, and you will not, under any circumstances, use lethal force again without explicit authorization from a licensed pro-hero. Izuku considered these terms. They were reasonable, given the mortal's limited understanding of the threats that existed beyond their comprehension. And he had come to UA to learn how to be a hero by this world's standards, not to impose his divine judgment indiscriminately. I accept these conditions, he said finally, though I reserve the right to act as necessary if innocent lives are at immediate risk. Nezu nodded, seeming relieved. That's all we can ask. You may return to your regular classes now, Midoriya, and thank you for your honesty, however difficult it may be for us to fully comprehend. As Izuku left the office, All Might followed him into the hallway. Young Midoriya, the hero called, his voice low. One more question, if I may. Izuku turned, waiting expectantly. This power of yours, divine key, you called it, can it be taken by force? Stolen, perhaps? The question was oddly specific, and Izuku sensed an underlying concern that went beyond academic curiosity. No, he answered truthfully. Divine key cannot be stolen or copied by mortal means. It can only be granted by gods or achieved through specific divine rituals. Why do you ask? All Might's expression darkened. There exists in this world a villain with the ability to steal quirks, to take the powers of others and make them his own. If what you possess is truly beyond quirks, then I would be immune to his ability, Izuku finished. This villain concerns you greatly. He should concern everyone, All Might said grimly. His name is All for One, and he has terrorized Japan from the shadows for generations. If he learned of your power, he would try to claim it, Izuku concluded, and fail. All Might studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Just be vigilant, young Midoriya, and remember that even with all your power, there are dangers in this world that shouldn't be underestimated. Izuku allowed himself a small, cold smile. I appreciate your concern, All Might, but perhaps it is this All for One who should be wary. Gods are not known for their mercy toward those who covet divine power. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving All Might staring after him with a mixture of concern and grim understanding. The UA Sports Festival arrived with much fanfare, the stadium packed with spectators eager to witness the next generation of heroes showcase their abilities. For Class 1A, still recovering emotionally from the USJ attack, it represented a chance to prove their resilience. Izuku stood with his classmates in the preparation room, his expression serene amidst their nervous energy. Todoroki, the dual quirk user who had remained distant from most of their peers, approached him with uncharacteristic directness. Midoriya, the heterochromatic boy, said, his voice low but intense, "I want you to know that I will defeat you in this festival." The declaration drew the attention of nearby classmates, who turned to watch the confrontation with wide eyes. Izuku regarded Todoroki calmly, sensing the deep-seated pain and determination driving the boy's challenge. "You seek to prove something to someone who isn't here," Izuku observed, causing Todoroki's eyes to widen slightly. "Your father, I presume? The flame hero endeavor?" Todoroki's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern." "Perhaps not," Izuku agreed, "but your challenge is misplaced. I'm not interested in competition or in proving my superiority. Those concerns are mortal." "What does that mean?" Todoroki demanded, his right side frosting slightly in response to his agitation. Izuku simply shook his head. "Compete if you must, Todoroki. Prove whatever you need to prove, but do not expect me to validate your personal vendetta through combat." Before Todoroki could respond, Ida called for everyone to line up for the entrance ceremony. As they filed out into the stadium, the roar of the crowd washed over them. Tens of thousands of spectators cheering for the UA students. Present Mike's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing each class with his characteristic enthusiasm. When Midnight called for the student representative to give the pledge, Izuku was surprised to hear his own name announced. Izuku Midoriya finished first in the entrance exam with an unprecedented score. Midnight explained as the crowd murmured in interest. "He will deliver the student pledge." As Izuku approached the microphone, he felt the weight of expectation from his classmates and teachers. This was an opportunity to present himself as the hero they wanted him to be, to play the role of the enthusiastic, determined student. Instead, he chose honesty. "I stand before you not as a champion," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the stadium, "but as a protector. The purpose of power is not victory or acclaim, but the defense of those who cannot defend themselves. Today, we demonstrate our abilities not to prove our worth, but to show our commitment to that sacred duty. Remember that even as we compete against one another." His words were met with a moment of surprised silence, followed by thunderous applause. Even some of his classmates looked at him with newfound respect, though Bakugo's scowl only deepened. The first event was an obstacle race, a challenge that would have been trivial for Izuku at his full power. Respecting the spirit of the competition, he decided to limit himself to abilities that might be explained by an exceptional energy manipulation quirk. No flight, no divine techniques, just enhanced speed and strength. Even with these self-imposed limitations, he easily outpaced the other competitors, navigating the giant robots, chasm, and minefield with effortless grace. He finished first, a full minute ahead of Todoroki, who took second place using an impressive combination of ice to create paths and obstacles for others. The second event, a cavalry battle, required teamwork, with students forming teams to capture headbands from opposing groups. Izuku, as the first-place finisher from the previous event, was assigned a 10 million point headband, making him the primary target for all other teams. To everyone's surprise, Uraraka immediately approached him. "Let's team up, Izuku," she suggested brightly. "Everyone will be after you, but I think we can handle it." Izuku studied her for a moment. "They will target us aggressively. Are you prepared for that?" "Of course." She pumped her fist enthusiastically. That's what being a hero is all about, facing challenges head-on. Her earnestness was refreshing, different from the calculated allegiances forming around them. Izuku nodded. "Very well. We'll need 2 more teammates." They were joined by Tokoyami, whose Dark Shadow offered excellent defense, and Hatsume from the support course, whose gadgets provided mobility enhancements. When the event began, the four positioned themselves strategically, with Izuku as the rider carrying the 10 million point headband. As expected, every other team immediately converged on them. Bakugo's team launched an aerial assault, while Todoroki's group created an ice path for rapid approach. Others came from different angles, all focused on the prize Izuku carried. What they didn't expect was Izuku's response. Instead of evading, he raised one hand and released a controlled pulse of energy that created a shockwave, pushing all approaching teams backward without causing harm. Izuku, that was amazing, Uraraka called from beneath him, momentarily forgetting to use her quirk to lighten his weight. But they're coming back. Indeed, the other teams were regrouping, more determined than ever. Todoroki's team approached cautiously, the dual quirk user's right hand frosted as he prepared to freeze them in place. Uraraka, Izuku directed calmly, on my signal, make us weightless. Hatsume, prepare your jetpack. Tokoyami, defensive perimeter. As Todoroki's team closed in, Izuku gave the signal. Uraraka activated her quirk, eliminating their weight, while Hatsume engaged her support gear. They shot upward just as Todoroki unleashed a wave of ice that froze the ground where they had been standing. Dark Shadow, now, Izuku commanded. Tokoyami's quirk extended outward, snatching headbands from multiple teams as they hovered above the competition. The crowd roared its approval at the spectacular display. For the remainder of the event, Izuku's team employed similar tactics, using Uraraka's zero gravity, Hatsume's support items, and Tokoyami's Dark Shadow for mobility and defense, while Izuku used precisely controlled energy pulses to keep opponents at bay. When the final horn sounded, they had not only protected their 10 million point headband, but had collected several others as well. And the winners of the cavalry battle are Team Midoriya, Present Mike announced. What an absolutely dominant performance! As they returned to solid ground, Uraraka beamed with pride. We did it, Izuku. We're moving on to the finals. Izuku nodded, allowing himself a small smile. Working with these mortals had been not unpleasant. There was something satisfying about protection that he had never found in destruction during his previous existence. The final event was a one-on-one tournament, with 16 students facing off in elimination matches. The bracket placed Izuku against Shinso from General Studies in the first round, Ida potentially in the second, and if he continued advancing, either Tokoyami or Ashido in the semifinals. Before his first match, Izuku was approached by Uraraka, who had been paired against Bakugo in her opening bout. Any advice for fighting Bakugo? She asked nervously. You seem to know him from before you. Izuku considered for a moment. He's powerful but predictable. His right hook is his favorite opening move, always accompanied by an explosion. If you can anticipate that and use your quirk on him immediately, you might gain an advantage. She nodded, determination replacing anxiety in her expression. Thanks, Izuku. Good luck in your matches, too. Luck is unnecessary, he replied simply, then paused, sensing her slight deflation at his response. But thank you for the sentiment. His first match against Shinso proved unexpectedly interesting. The purple-haired student possessed a brainwashing quirk that activated when someone responded to his questions. Having observed earlier matches, Izuku was aware of this ability and remained silent despite Shinso's provocations. Frustrated by his silence, Shinso attempted to physically push Izuku out of bounds, a futile effort as Izuku remained immovable as a mountain. After allowing the boy several attempts, Izuku simply placed a finger against Shinso's chest and pushed gently, sending him sliding out of the ring. Midoriya advances by ring out, Midnight announced. What an anticlimactic first match. In the stands, All Might watched with a pensive expression. Beside him, Aizawa sighed. He's holding back considerably, the Erasure hero noted. That wasn't even a fraction of what he showed at USJ. Indeed, All Might agreed. It seems young Midoriya is taking our discussion about restraint to heart. Uraraka's match against Bakugo was far more dramatic. Despite using the strategy Izuku had suggested, she ultimately fell to the explosive teen's raw power and combat experience. Still, she had fought valiantly, earning respect from the audience and even a grudging acknowledgement from Bakugo himself. As the tournament progressed, Izuku continued to advance, defeating Ida in the second round by simply withstanding the speedster's recipro burst, then catching him mid-movement and placing him gently outside the boundary. His semi-final match against Tokoyami ended similarly, with Dark Shadow proving ineffective against Izuku's controlled energy emissions, which created enough light to weaken the quirk significantly. The final match pitted him against Todoroki, who had defeated Bakugo in a stunning upset by combining his ice and fire quirks for the first time in the tournament. As they faced each other in the arena, Izuku could sense the emotional breakthrough the dual quirk user had experienced. "You've reconciled with your power," Izuku observed as they took their positions. "Good." Todoroki's expression was resolute. "My fire is mine, not his. I understand that now." "Then this match has already served its purpose," Izuku replied. "Shall we give them a show worthy of your newfound resolve?" When midnight signaled the start, Todoroki immediately unleashed a massive wave of ice that engulfed the entire arena floor, threatening to encase Izuku completely. Rather than evading, Izuku simply stood his ground, allowing the ice to surround him. For a moment, it appeared Todoroki had secured an instant victory. Then the ice began to glow with purple light from within, fracturing and melting as Izuku's energy radiated outward. With a controlled pulse, he shattered his icy prison, sending crystalline fragments showering across the arena. "Impressive," Izuku acknowledged. "Now show me your flames." Todoroki didn't hesitate, his left side erupting in fire that he directed in a concentrated blast toward Izuku. Simultaneously, he created an ice path with his right hand, circling to attack from another angle. Izuku allowed both the fire and a subsequent ice attack to connect, demonstrating his invulnerability while respecting Todoroki's determination. When the dual quirk user paused, panting from the exertion of using both sides at such intensity, Izuku finally moved. With speed just below what would appear supernatural to the audience, he closed the distance between them. Todoroki attempted to create an ice barrier, but Izuku simply walked through it, shattering the frozen defense with his approach. "You've fought well," Izuku said, standing before Todoroki. "But this ends now." He placed his palm against Todoroki's chest and released a gentle pulse of energy, enough to push the exhausted student out of bounds without causing harm. "Todoroki is out of bounds," Midnight announced. "Midoriya wins the UA Sports Festival." The crowd erupted in cheers, though there was a noticeable undercurrent of surprise at how anticlimactic the final confrontation had been. Despite Todoroki's impressive display of power, Izuku had won without appearing to exert himself at all. At the awards ceremony, Izuku stood on the highest platform, accepting the gold medal from All Might with a respectful nod. Todoroki took silver, while Tokoyami and Bakugo shared the bronze position, the latter having to be brought to the podium restrained and muzzled after his explosive reaction to losing in the semifinals. "Congratulations, young Midoriya," All Might said as he placed the medal around Izuku's neck. "You showed admirable restraint throughout the competition." "I'm learning," Izuku replied simply. As the festival concluded and students prepared for their upcoming internships with pro heroes, a figure watched the broadcast from a darkened room, his face obscured by medical equipment that sustained his ruined body. "Most interesting," All for One murmured, his attention fixed on the green-haired boy who had dominated the competition with seemingly effortless control. "Tamura, what do you know about this Midoriya?" Shigaraki scratched his neck irritably, glaring at the screen. "He's the one who killed Nomu. One shot right through the chest, and he took down Kurogiri like it was nothing." "Indeed?" All for One's interest sharpened. "And his quirk? Energy manipulation, supposedly." Shigaraki's fingers twitched with agitation. "But it's more than that. He's got super strength, speed, durability. He flies. And there's something about his energy. It feels wrong. Different." All for One contemplated this information, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the arm of his chair. Throughout his long life, he had encountered countless quirks, stolen many of the most powerful ones, and combined them in ways their original owners could never have imagined. But something about this boy's abilities stirred a long-dormant sense of caution within him. "I believe," he said finally, "that young Midoriya deserves our personal attention. Perhaps it's time I assess this power of his myself." Shigaraki's eyes widened behind the hand that covered his face. "You mean?" "Yes, Tamura." All for One's voice carried an anticipatory edge. "It's time for the master to take a more active role." In the weeks following the sports festival, Izuku found himself inundated with internship offers from top heroes across Japan. His dominant performance had caught the attention of the entire hero industry, with agencies clamoring for the chance to mentor UA's most promising first-year student. To everyone's surprise, he selected an offer from Gran Torino, a retired hero who had once taught All Might and was known for his harsh but effective training methods. When questioned about his choice, Izuku simply stated that power without technique was wasted potential, and Gran Torino's reputation suggested he valued efficiency above showmanship. The first day of his internship, Izuku arrived at a dilapidated building in an older part of the city. The apartment, listed in the internship paperwork, was dusty and appeared abandoned until a diminutive elderly man in a hero costume dropped from the ceiling, landing with surprising agility for his age. "So you're the god boy All Might warned me about," Gran Torino said without preamble, his beady eyes assessing Izuku with surprising sharpness. "Gotta say, you don't look like much." Izuku raised an eyebrow. "Appearances can be deceiving, as I'm sure you know, given your own diminutive stature and considerable power," Gran Torino cackled. "Cocky, aren't you? Good. That'll make it all the more satisfying when I knock you down a peg." Using his jet quirk, the elderly hero suddenly propelled himself across the room, bouncing off walls and ceiling with incredible speed before aiming a kick directly at Izuku's head. Rather than dodging, Izuku simply raised his hand and caught Gran Torino's foot mid-strike, halting the hero's momentum instantly. "Impressive speed," Izuku acknowledged, "for a mortal." Gran Torino's eyes narrowed. "So it's true, you really do think you're some kind of god?" "I don't think it, I know it." Izuku released the hero's foot, allowing him to land. "I contain the consciousness and power of Zamasu, apprentice Supreme Kai of Universe 10. In my previous existence, I judged mortal life unworthy and sought to eliminate it. Now, I seek redemption through protection." The old hero studied him for a long moment, then burst into laughter. "Well, that's the most interesting backstory I've heard in 70 years of hero work. Whether you're delusional or telling the truth, you've got power to back up your claims, and that's what matters." He gestured for Izuku to follow him into a small kitchen area where he prepared tea with practiced movements. "All Might tells me you need to learn restraint and non-lethal combat techniques. Says you're too quick to eliminate threats, permanently." Izuku accepted the offered tea with a respectful nod. "I eliminated a Nomu at USJ because it posed an imminent danger that couldn't be contained by conventional means." "And who made you judge, jury, and executioner?" Gran Torino challenged, his voice suddenly sharp. "I was literally created to be exactly that," Izuku replied calmly. "Supreme Kais are divine judges of mortal civilizations, but," he paused, considering his words carefully, "I understand that in this world, in this life, different standards apply. I'm willing to learn alternative approaches." Gran Torino sipped his tea, studying Izuku over the rim of his cup. "Well, at least you're not completely unreasonable. All right, God Boy, here's how this internship is going to work. I'm going to teach you precision. Not just power, but control. So fine you could knock out a villain with a tap or incapacitate them without leaving so much as a bruise." He set down his cup with a decisive click. "By the time you leave here, you'll be able to neutralize threats without resorting to your divine judgment. Save that for the truly world-ending scenarios if they ever come." Izuku nodded. "That seems practical." "Damn right it is." Gran Torino stood, his diminutive form somehow commanding despite his size. "Now finish your tea. Training starts in 5 minutes, and I don't care if you're a god or not, you're going to sweat." The next few days were surprisingly instructive. Gran Torino's teaching style was unorthodox but effective, focusing on precision and control rather than raw power. He had Izuku practice channeling his energy in increasingly minute amounts, creating exercises where the goal was minimum force for maximum effect. On the 4th day of his internship, as they took a break from training, Gran Torino's television broadcast an emergency news bulletin. A hero killer known as Stain had been sighted in Hosu City, where several UA students, including Ida, were completing their internships. "Stain," Gran Torino muttered, his expression darkening. "Nasty piece of work, that one. Already killed 17 heroes and crippled dozens more." Izuku watched the broadcast with interest. "He targets heroes specifically, not civilians?" Yeah, has some warped ideology about true heroism and purging those he deems unworthy. The old hero glanced at Izuku. Kinda reminds me of someone else I've heard about. Izuku acknowledged the parallel with a slight nod. There's a certain resonance, though my former self targeted all mortal life, not just a specific profession. Well, don't get any ideas about divine judgment with this one, Gran Torino warned. Stain is dangerous, but he's still a human criminal who should face human justice. Before Izuku could respond, the television broadcast was interrupted by breaking news. A Nomu attack in downtown Hosu with multiple casualties reported and heroes struggling to contain the artificial beings. Gran Torino was on his feet instantly. We're heading there now. This is official hero work, so you'll follow my lead and my orders. Understood? Understood, Izuku agreed, though he made no promises about what would happen if more Nomu were involved. They reached Ho City via train, arriving to find multiple blocks engulfed in flames and chaos. Pro-heroes were scattered throughout the area, battling 3 Nomu that rampaged through the streets. Unlike the USJ Nomu, these appeared less powerful but more agile, designed for speed and destruction rather than raw strength. Stay close, Gran Torino instructed as they approached the battlefield. Support the evacuation efforts, and he was interrupted by a notification on Izuku's phone, a location sent by Ida without any accompanying message. The coordinates pointed to an alley several blocks away from the main battle. Ida may be in trouble, Izuku said, showing Gran Torino the message. The hero killer might have found him. The old hero frowned. That reckless boy, his brother was one of Stain's victims. He must be seeking revenge. He looked at the ongoing Nomu battle, then back at Izuku. I need to help with the Nomu. Can I trust you to find Ida without resorting to lethal force? Izuku considered. If Stain is merely a misguided human with a flawed ideology, I will subdue him non-lethally. That's not quite the promise I was looking for, but it'll have to do, Gran Torino muttered. Go, and remember what we've practiced. Izuku took to the air, flying toward the coordinates Ida had sent. As he approached, he sensed multiple energy signatures in a narrow alleyway, one fading rapidly, one fluctuating with distress, and one vibrating with malevolent purpose. Landing at the alley entrance, he found a scene of impending execution. Ida lay paralyzed on the ground, his armor damaged and a blade embedded in his shoulder. Nearby, a pro-hero, Native, was similarly immobilized. Standing over them both was a gaunt figure with bandages covering his face and multiple blades strapped to his body. Stain turned as Izuku arrived, his snake-like tongue retracting into his mouth. Another child playing hero? He hissed, eyes narrowing. Leave now, and I might spare you the purge. Midoriya, Ida gasped from the ground, his voice strained. Run. His quirk paralyzes you if he tastes your blood. Izuku assessed the situation calmly. Stain was undoubtedly dangerous by mortal standards. His stance, the casual way he held his blades, the focused killing intent radiating from him, all marked him as a trained predator. But compared to the divine power Izuku possessed, he was little more than an insect with delusions of significance. You kill heroes you deem unworthy, Izuku observed, stepping into the alley. You believe yourself to be a judge of true heroism. Stain tilted his head, studying Izuku with newfound interest. I cleanse society of false heroes, those who seek fame and fortune instead of true justice. Only All Might understands what it means to be a true hero. And who granted you the authority to make these judgments? Izuku asked, genuinely curious about the human's reasoning. Someone must stand for true heroism, Stain replied, his voice taking on a fanatic edge. Society is diseased with false heroes who care only for themselves. I am the necessary cure. Izuku almost laughed at the irony, how similar this human's justification was to his own as Zamasu, the self-appointed judge, the righteous executioner culling those deemed unworthy. It was like looking into a warped mirror that reflected his own past arrogance on a much smaller scale. I once thought as you did, Izuku said, continuing his advance, that I alone could judge who deserved to live and who deserved to die. I was wrong. Stain's eyes narrowed. You know nothing of my conviction, child. I know everything about conviction like yours, Izuku countered. The difference is that I've learned from my mistakes. You still cling to yours. With a snarl, Stain lunged forward, his blade aimed at Izuku's throat with deadly precision. Izuku didn't dodge. The blade connected with his neck and shattered, its edge crumpling against his divinely reinforced skin. Stain stumbled back in shock, staring at his broken weapon. What? Before he could recover, Izuku moved, applying the precision techniques Gran Torino had taught him. With a carefully controlled tap to specific pressure points, he neutralized Stain's motor functions, causing the hero killer to collapse to the ground, conscious but immobilized. Impossible! Stain rasped, his body rigid from the precise neurological disruption Izuku had induced. What are you? Izuku knelt beside Ida, examining his friend's injuries with concern. I am what you claim to be, a true judge of character, and I judge you in need of rehabilitation, not execution. After ensuring Ida and Native were stable, Izuku secured Stain with capture tape and contacted the authorities. Within minutes, pro-heroes and police converged on the alley, surprised to find the notorious hero killer subdued by a first-year student. As Stain was loaded into a police transport, he fixed his gaze on Izuku with disturbing intensity. You, he called out, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. You have the eyes of a true hero. Whatever you are, you possess conviction beyond these false pretenders. The hero killer's words attracted the attention of nearby news crews, who immediately began recording as Stain continued his impromptu speech. The only one who can kill me is All Might. The only one I'll acknowledge as true is you. You're different from these others, these fakes. His fanatical declarations were cut short as the police secured him in the vehicle, but the damage was done. The connection between Izuku and the hero killer had been broadcast live, creating an association that would have unforeseen consequences. In the aftermath of the Hosu incident, Izuku received both commendation for capturing Stain and a stern reprimand for acting without proper authorization. Gran Torino, however, seemed more impressed than angry. You didn't kill him, the old hero noted as they returned to his apartment. Even though, from what the police report says, he tried to slit your throat. He posed no real threat to me, Izuku replied simply, and I employed the pressure point techniques you taught me. They were quite effective. Gran Torino grinned. See, even gods can learn new tricks. His expression turned serious. Though that speech he gave about acknowledging you is going to cause problems. Media's already running with it, the hero killer's chosen one and other such nonsense. Izuku shrugged. The opinions of a deranged human matter little to me. Maybe, but they matter to the public, Gran Torino warned. Perception shapes reality in the hero business. Be careful that his endorsement doesn't color how people see you. The old hero's warning proved prescient. When Izuku returned to UA after the internship week, he found whispers and sideways glances following him through the halls. Most of his classmates were supportive, congratulating him on capturing such a dangerous villain, but there was an undercurrent of unease that hadn't been there before. Aizawa addressed it directly during homeroom. I'm sure you've all seen the news about Stain's capture and his subsequent commentary. Remember that the hero killer was a murderer with a warped ideology. His approval is not something to be sought or celebrated. His gaze fixed on Izuku momentarily before continuing. That said, Midoriya acted to save his classmate and a pro-hero, using non-lethal means to subdue a dangerous villain. Those actions reflect the values we expect from UA students. The implicit approval in Aizawa's statement wasn't lost on the class, who seemed to collectively relax, all except Bakugo, who glared at Izuku with intensified resentment. Just because you could down some third-rate villain doesn't make you special, Midoriya, he muttered as they filed out of the classroom. Izuku paused, regarding his childhood acquaintance with mild curiosity. Your continued hostility is puzzling, Bakugo. I've never claimed superiority over you. You don't have to claim it, Bakugo snarled, his palms sparking with small explosions. You just stand there with that condescending look, like you're some kind of god looking down on everyone. The irony of the statement almost made Izuku smile. Perhaps your perception says more about you than it does about me. Before Bakugo could escalate further, All Might appeared in the hallway, his perpetual smile somehow managing to convey urgency. Young Midoriya, a word if you please, the symbol of peace called. Leaving a fuming Bakugo behind, Izuku followed All Might to an empty classroom. The hero closed the door carefully before powering down to his skeletal form, his expression grave. There's been a development you should be aware of, Toshinori said without preamble. The villain I mentioned before, All for One, has shown interest in you following the sports festival and Stain incident. Izuku's expression remained neutral. You mentioned he steals quirks. Is he under the impression he could take my power? Most likely, Toshinori confirmed. He wouldn't be the first to make that mistake. Over the centuries, he's attempted to steal or copy every powerful quirk he's encountered. Some believe he's been alive since quirks first appeared. Centuries. Izuku raised an eyebrow. He extends his life by stealing longevity quirks, I presume? Toshinori nodded. Among other methods, he's accumulated hundreds of quirks, possibly thousands. Even at my peak, he nearly killed me in our last confrontation. He gestured to the hideous scar tissue visible beneath his shirt. This was his work. For the first time, Izuku felt a flicker of genuine concern. Not for himself. No mortal, no matter how augmented could threaten his divine essence, but for this world. A being who had survived centuries by stealing powers would have accumulated not just strength, but knowledge and cunning. Such a being targeting his mother or his classmates could cause significant harm before Izuku could intervene. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Toshinori's sunken eyes met his directly. Because our intelligence suggests he's making a move soon. His organization, the League of Villains, has been unusually active gathering information about UA's upcoming training camp. I believe they may target you specifically. Let them come, Izuku said simply. If this All for One wishes to test himself against divine power, he will learn the folly of his ambition. That's exactly what concerns me, Toshinori replied. Your confidence is justified, but your approach, your willingness to eliminate threats permanently, could play directly into his hands. How so? All for One doesn't just want power, Toshinori explained. He wants to destroy the symbol of peace and hope that heroes represent. If you kill him, especially in public or dramatic fashion, it could create the very chaos he desires, turning public opinion against heroes and validating his worldview that power is all that matters. Izuku considered this perspective. It was a nuance he might have dismissed in his previous existence, when mortal opinions were irrelevant to his divine mission. But now, as a student aspiring to be recognized as a hero in this society, such considerations had relevance. What would you suggest? He asked finally. Caution, Toshinori answered. Restraint, and above all, protection of your classmates if the League does attack. They would be the most vulnerable targets. Izuku nodded. Very well. I will be vigilant and prioritize protection over confrontation. Thank you, Toshinori said, relief evident in his voice. One more thing. I've spoken with Nezu about arranging additional security for your mother. If All for One can't reach you directly, he might target those you care about. For a brief moment, divine wrath flickered in Izuku's eyes, a cold, terrible promise of judgment that made even the former symbol of peace step back involuntarily. If he threatens my mother, Izuku said, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance, no force in this universe will save him from my judgment. The UA training camp began with anticipation and excitement. Class 1A, along with their peers from Class 1B, traveled to a remote forest facility owned by the Wild Pussycats, a hero team specializing in mountain rescues. The stated purpose was to strengthen their quirks through intensive training, but Izuku sensed an underlying anxiety among the faculty chaperones. Aizawa and Vlad King maintained constant vigilance, scanning the forest perimeter during training exercises. The Pussycats, while maintaining their cheerful demeanor for the students, conducted regular security sweeps of the area. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen. On the third night of the camp, as students relaxed after a grueling day of training, Izuku sat apart from the others, meditating beneath a large oak tree. In this quiet state, his divine senses extended further, allowing him to monitor the energy signatures of everyone within several kilometers. That's when he felt it. A malevolent presence at the edge of his awareness, accompanied by several other distinct signatures moving through the forest with purpose. One signature in particular stood out, a swirling void of stolen power, hundreds of quirks layered atop each other in a grotesque amalgamation. Izuku opened his eyes, rose to his feet, and walked calmly toward Aizawa, who was supervising the evening meal preparation. They're here, he said simply. Aizawa's body tensed instantly. How many? Where? 12 distinct signatures approaching from the north and east, Izuku replied, and one more powerful presence observing from a distance, approximately 3 kilometers away. The teacher didn't question how Izuku could know this. Instead, he immediately activated the emergency protocols, gathering the students while contacting the Pussycats and Vlad King. "Everyone inside now," Aizawa commanded. "Training camp is suspended. We have a potential villain incursion." As students hurried toward the main lodge, confusion and fear evident on many faces, Izuku remained outside, his gaze fixed on the northern tree line. "Midoriya, inside," Aizawa ordered sharply. "That includes you." "You'll need me out here," Izuku replied without looking at his teacher. "They're coming for me specifically. Putting me with the others only endangers them." Before Aizawa could argue further, the forest erupted in blue flame. Trees ignited in unnatural fire that spread with alarming speed, creating a wall of azure inferno between the students and the lodge. From within the flames emerged a figure with patches of purple skin held together by crude metal staples. Behind him came others, a lizard-like man with a specialized gas mask, a blonde girl in a school uniform with a manic grin, and several more figures with distinctly villainous appearances. "Found you," the patched-together villain called out, his eyes fixing on Izuku with predatory intent. "The boss wants to meet you, green boy." Aizawa moved instantly, his capture weapon unfurling as his hair rose with the activation of his erasure quirk. "Midoriya, get the students to safety. I'll handle this." But Izuku didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between the approaching villains and his classmates. "Evacuate the others," he told Aizawa. "I'll deal with this." "That's not how this works," Aizawa began, but he was cut off as the lizard-like villain released a cloud of purple gas that rapidly expanded toward them. Izuku raised his hand and released a controlled pulse of energy that dispersed the gas instantly, creating a vacuum that temporarily disoriented the villains. "Their objective is me," Izuku stated calmly. "This is a targeted operation, likely orchestrated by All for One. Get everyone to safety while I draw them away." The mention of All for One's name caused Aizawa's eyes to widen momentarily. Before he could respond, the blonde villain girl lunged forward with surprising speed, a knife gleaming in her hand. "Let me cut you up, pretty boy," she squealed, slashing wildly at Izuku. "Just a little blood for Toga." Izuku sidestepped her attack effortlessly, simultaneously catching the wrist of another villain who had attempted to approach from behind. With precise pressure applied to nerve clusters, he rendered the second attacker unconscious instantly. "Go," he told Aizawa again, more forcefully this time. "Protect the others. I'll handle this." Something in his tone, perhaps the cold certainty of divine purpose, finally convinced Aizawa. The teacher nodded grimly before turning to shepherd the remaining students away from the growing conflict. Left alone to face the villain group, Izuku assessed his opponents dispassionately. None possessed power that could genuinely threaten him, but collectively they might endanger his classmates if allowed to roam freely. "The League of Villains, I presume?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly despite the crackling flames surrounding them. The patched villain grinned unnaturally wide. "Dabi," he introduced himself. "This is Toga, Twice, Spinner, Magni, Mustard, and Moonfish. Quite the welcome committee, isn't it? Where is your master?" Izuku asked directly. "I sense his presence nearby." Dabi's confident expression faltered slightly. "You sense him? That's not possible." "For mortals, perhaps," Izuku replied. He turned his gaze toward the distant presence he had detected earlier. "If All for One wants to meet me, he should come himself instead of sending pawns." The villains exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsettled by Izuku's knowledge and composure. After a moment of hesitation, Dabi's hands ignited with blue flame. "Plans change," he snarled. "Kurogiri." A familiar black mist appeared beside the villain group, a new warp gate generated by the mist villain Izuku had disabled at USJ. This time, however, Kurogiri seemed different, his yellow eyes dimmer, his mist form less cohesive, as though he had been imperfectly repaired. "Capture the target," Kurogiri instructed, his voice echoing strangely from within the mist. "Master awaits." The villains attacked simultaneously, Dabi launching concentrated blue flame, Toga darting in with her knife, Twice creating duplicates of himself that charged from multiple angles while the others moved to flank Izuku. For a brief moment, Izuku considered using this opportunity to eliminate the entire league at once. A single divine blast would vaporize them all, removing a significant threat to his classmates and society. But All Might's warning about public perception echoed in his mind, along with Gran Torino's lessons on restraint. Instead, he channeled his energy differently, creating a spherical barrier that the villain's attacks simply bounced off. Flame, blades, and quirk-enhanced strikes alike dissipated harmlessly against the translucent purple energy field. "Is that all?" Izuku asked, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment. "I expected more from those who would align themselves with a being as notorious as All for One." Dabi's expression contorted with rage. "You think you're hot shit, don't you? Let's see how you handle this." The flame villain raised both hands, generating blue fire so intense it melted the ground beneath him. Instead of directing it at Izuku, however, he aimed at the forest beyond, where Izuku knew his classmates were being evacuated. "Stop them, or save your friends," Dabi taunted. "Your choice, hero." Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly, the first display of genuine emotion since the confrontation began. These villains were not merely misguided or desperate, they were deliberately targeting innocents to manipulate him. Such tactics validated his original assessment of mortal evil. In an instant, his barrier expanded outward with controlled force, knocking all the assembled villains backward. Before they could recover, Izuku was in motion, moving with divine speed that made him appear to teleport between targets. One by one, he disabled the League members, not with lethal force, but with precisely targeted strikes that rendered them unconscious or immobilized. Toga fell first, her knife clattering to the ground as Izuku struck a pressure point that instantly knocked her out. Twice, and his duplicates dissolved after a similar strike. Spinner and Magni attempted to flee, only to find Izuku suddenly before them, his hands moving in a blur as he neutralized their motor functions. Dabi, realizing his companions were falling rapidly, unleashed his most powerful attack, a concentrated stream of blue flame that engulfed Izuku completely. For several seconds, the forest clearing became an inferno of azure fire, so intense that the ground beneath liquefied into molten stone. When the flames subsided, Izuku stood unmoved, not a mark on his body or clothing. His expression remained calm as he met Dabi's increasingly desperate gaze. "Impossible," the flame villain gasped, staggering backward. "No one survives that." "I am not no one," Izuku replied simply. Before Dabi could react further, Izuku closed the distance between them and placed his palm against the villain's chest. With careful control, he released a minimal pulse of divine ki, just enough to overload Dabi's nervous system without causing permanent damage. The villain collapsed, unconscious but alive. Only Kurogiri remained, his mist form already expanding to create an escape portal. Izuku turned his attention to the warp villain, recognizing the threat his transportation ability posed. "You've been repaired since our last encounter," Izuku observed. "Imperfectly, it seems." Kurogiri's yellow eyes narrowed within the mist. "You will not escape Master's interest so easily. He sees your potential, even if you do not." "I understand my potential perfectly," Izuku countered. "It is your Master who fails to comprehend what he faces." With deliberate precision, Izuku extended his hand, forming a thin blade of purple energy from his fingertip. Before Kurogiri could fully activate his warp gate, Izuku sliced through the mist once more, targeting the metal collar that contained the villain's physical body. The warp gate collapsed, and Kurogiri's mist form dissipated, leaving only the unconscious human component behind. Izuku bound him with capture tape from his hero costume, ensuring the transportation quirk could not be reactivated. With all visible threats neutralized, Izuku turned his attention to the distant presence he had sensed earlier, the layered, corrupted energy signature that could only belong to All for One. It remained stationary, observing from afar, likely assessing the failure of his subordinates. Izuku considered pursuing this presence immediately, confronting the ancient villain on his own terms. But his priority remained the safety of his classmates. All for One could wait. First, he needed to ensure the evacuation was proceeding without interference. Flying above the forest canopy, Izuku quickly located the student group, now accompanied by pro-heroes who had responded to the emergency signal. Aizawa spotted him and separated from the group, approaching with visible concern. "The villains?" the teacher asked tersely. "Neutralized and restrained," Izuku reported, though there was a more powerful presence observing from a distance. It's still there. Aizawa's expression darkened. All for one? Most likely. The energy signature matches what All Might described, multiple quirks layered in a single vessel. Do not engage, Aizawa instructed firmly. That's an order, Midoriya. All for one is beyond even most pro-heroes. We need to get everyone to safety and call for reinforcements. Izuku nodded, though in truth he had already decided on his course of action. If All for One sought him specifically, continuing to remain with his classmates only prolonged their danger. Better to confront the villain directly, away from innocent bystanders. I'll escort the rear of the group, he told Aizawa, to ensure no stragglers are targeted. The teacher studied him suspiciously, but nodded. Fine, but stay within sight. As the evacuation continued through the darkened forest, Izuku maintained his position at the rear of the group, his senses extended to monitor for additional threats. The malevolent presence remained at a distance, neither approaching nor retreating, as though waiting for a specific opportunity. That opportunity came when the evacuation reached a clearing where emergency vehicles waited to transport students to safety. In the momentary confusion of organizing departures, Izuku slipped away, flying rapidly toward the presence he had been monitoring. The forest grew denser as he approached, the trees older and larger, creating a natural sanctuary untouched by the villain attack. At its center was a small clearing, and there, seated calmly on a fallen log, waited a figure that radiated corrupted power. All for One appeared surprisingly ordinary at first glance. A man in an immaculate suit, his face obscured by a strange medical apparatus that covered his eyes and nose, leaving only his mouth visible. But as Izuku landed at the clearing's edge, he sensed the abomination beneath the civilized veneer. Hundreds of stolen quirks swirling in a chaotic amalgamation, power taken by force and bent to a single will. Izuku Midoriya, All for One, greeted, his voice mechanically enhanced by his mask. Or should I address you by your other name? Zamasu, was it? The apprentice supreme Kai? Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication of his surprise. You've been eavesdropping. All for One chuckled, the sound distorted by his breathing apparatus. I have eyes and ears everywhere. Your conversation with the UA faculty was quite illuminating. A reincarnated god seeking redemption. How positively mythological. He stood, adjusting his suit jacket with fastidious care. I've existed for over 2 centuries, young Midoriya. I've witnessed the rise of quirks, the birth of hero society, the fall of old empires, and the rise of new ones. In all that time, I've encountered many who claimed divine origin or power. None have proven their claims. I don't need to prove anything to you, Izuku replied calmly. Your belief or disbelief is irrelevant. Perhaps, All for One conceded, but your power is not. I've observed you closely. At USJ during the sports festival, your encounter with the hero killer, you possess abilities that defy conventional quirk classification. He took a step forward, his mask gleaming in the moonlight. I've collected thousands of quirks over my lifetime, young Midoriya. Each one adds to my understanding of the fundamental nature of these abilities. Yet yours resists classification. It's almost as if it isn't a quirk at all. It isn't, Izuku confirmed, seeing no reason to hide the truth. What I possess is divine ki energy that exists beyond the mortal realm. It cannot be stolen, copied, or erased by quirks. All for One's mouth curved into a smile beneath his mask. A bold claim, shall we test it? Without warning, the villain extended his hand, activating a quirk that Izuku recognized as similar to Aizawa's erasure ability, but with a distinctly different signature, likely a stolen variant. When that had no effect, All for One immediately followed with another quirk, one that seemed designed to copy abilities. Izuku remained unmoved, his divine ki flowing undisturbed. Are you satisfied, or would you like to continue this futile demonstration? All for One lowered his hand, his smile fading. Most interesting. Your power truly does seem immune to quirk interaction, which leaves the question, can it be taken directly? The ancient villain moved with surprising speed, closing the distance between them in an instant, his hand reaching for Izuku's face. This, Izuku knew, was the original All for One quirk, the ability to steal powers by direct contact. Rather than evade, Izuku allowed the villain's hand to connect with his forehead, curious to see the result of this attempted theft. All for One's fingers pressed against his skin, and the villain's quirk activated, a sensation like hooks attempting to latch onto Izuku, searching for something to extract. But Divine Ki wasn't a quirk factor that could be located in DNA or neural pathways. It was Izuku's very essence, integrated with his immortal soul. The hooks found nothing to grasp, sliding ineffectually against divine power that existed on a plane beyond mortal reach. All for One recoiled. Actual shock evident in his body language despite his masked face. "Impossible," he murmured. "Every quirk has a source, a mechanism that can be identified and extracted. Every power has a core that can be taken." "As I said," Izuku replied, "what I possess isn't a quirk, it's divinity itself." For the first time in perhaps centuries, All for One found himself genuinely uncertain. He had built his empire on the ability to take whatever power caught his interest, to incorporate it into his collection and wield it as his own. This boy represented something he had never encountered, power that existed beyond his reach. It was, Izuku realized, like watching a core belief system crumble in real time. For a being who had defined himself by the acquisition of others' abilities, the existence of power that could not be taken represented an existential threat. "If I cannot take your power," All for One said finally, his voice hardening, "then I must eliminate you as a variable. A shame, really. You could have been quite useful." The villain's body began to transform, his suit tearing as his arms morphed into grotesque, weaponized appendages. Multiple quirks activated simultaneously. Air cannons, strength enhancement, kinetic boosters, impact nullification, and dozens more layering atop each other in a display of raw, stolen power. "I had hoped to add your abilities to my collection," All for One continued, his voice distorting as his transformation progressed. "But I've eliminated many threats over my lifetime. You'll simply be one more obstacle removed." Izuku watched this display with divine detachment. He had encountered beings of far greater power in his previous existence, destroyer gods capable of erasing universes with a thought, supreme kais who shaped reality itself. Compared to such entities, All for One was merely a mortal who had gathered scraps of power, impressive by earthly standards but cosmically insignificant. "You still don't understand what you're facing," Izuku said quietly, "but you will." As All for One launched his attack, a barrage of destructive quirks combined into a single devastating strike, Izuku finally released a fraction of his true power. His aura manifested visibly, a rose-pink energy field that illuminated the forest clearing with otherworldly light. His hair shifted, rising slightly as it transformed from green to the same rose-pink hue, while his eyes changed to a piercing silver pink that seemed to look through rather than at his opponent. The transformation to Super Saiyan Rosé was instantaneous, yet its effect on the surrounding area was profound. The air itself seemed to grow heavy with divine presence, plants bent away as if in supplication, and All for One's combined attack simply dissipated against the divine aura without making contact. "What is this?" All for One whispered, genuine fear entering his voice for perhaps the first time in his centuries-long existence. "Divine judgment," Izuku replied, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Before All for One could react further, Izuku moved, not with merely superhuman speed, but with divine instantaneous movement that transcended physical limitations. One moment he stood across the clearing, the next he was directly before the villain, his hand placed against All for One's chest. "Black Kamehameha," Izuku intoned calmly. A concentrated beam of purple-black energy erupted from his palm, boring through All for One's chest and continuing onward to cut a perfect tunnel through the forest beyond. The villain's body jerked from the impact, his various defensive quirks activating too late to prevent the catastrophic damage. Yet, to Izuku's mild surprise, All for One didn't immediately fall. The villain staggered backward, a smoking hole where his heart should have been, but somehow remained standing. Regeneration quirks activated visibly, attempting to repair the damage even as his life force began to fade. "Impressive resilience," Izuku acknowledged, "but futile." Raising his hand, Izuku formed his energy scythe, a curved blade of divine ki extending from his arm, its edge sharp enough to cut through dimensions themselves. With a single fluid motion, he swept it through All for One's midsection, severing the villain's body in half. The upper portion toppled backward, All for One's mask cracking from the impact as he hit the ground. Still, the villain lived, his stolen regeneration quirks working desperately to keep him conscious despite the mortal damage. 2 centuries. All for One gasped, blood bubbling from beneath his mask. I've survived 2 centuries, defeated All Might himself. I cannot be killed by a child. Izuku stood over the dying villain, his divine aura illuminating the grotesque scene. I am no child. I am the divine judgment you have evaded for 2 centuries. Your collection ends here. Extending both hands, Izuku formed multiple energy blades from his fingertips, the violent, fierce God Slicer technique, and sent them arcing through All for One's body. Each blade severed a different portion, methodically dismembering the villain while cauterizing the wounds to prevent his regeneration quirks from functioning. As the last blade completed its work, Izuku gathered divine energy between his palms, forming a concentrated sphere of destruction. All for One, now reduced to a head and partial torso, could only watch as his executioner prepared the final strike. Binding Black Kamehameha, Izuku declared, releasing not a beam, but a sphere that engulfed All for One's remains completely. Within the contained energy field, the villain's body began to disintegrate at the molecular level, his stolen quirks unable to prevent the divine erasure of his very existence. When the energy field dissipated, nothing remained of All for One. Not ash, not dust, not a single molecule. The ground where he had lain was smooth and unmarked, as though the villain had never existed. Izuku allowed his transformation to fade, his hair returning to its natural green as the rose aura receded. The forest around him was eerily silent, wildlife having fled from the divine presence that had momentarily descended into their realm. "It is done," he said quietly to the empty clearing. As he prepared to return to his classmates, Izuku sensed a new presence entering the clearing behind him, a familiar energy signature that carried both great power and profound exhaustion. "Young Midoriya," All Might said, his voice heavy as he surveyed the scene. "What have you done?" Izuku turned to face his teacher, who stood at the edge of the clearing in his muscled form, though steam rose from his body as he struggled to maintain it. "I eliminated a threat that could not be contained by conventional means," Izuku replied calmly. "All for One is gone, permanently." All Might's perpetual smile was absent, replaced by a grim expression that aged his heroic visage. "You executed him, without trial, without due process." "He had evaded your justice for centuries," Izuku countered. "How many more would have suffered while your systems failed to contain him? How many lives would have been lost to preserve the illusion of control?" The hero's shoulders slumped, and he suddenly reverted to his skeletal form, no longer able to maintain his powered state. "That wasn't your decision to make," he said quietly. "Wasn't it?" Izuku asked. "You told me yourself that All for One has existed for generations, accumulating quirks and power, causing untold suffering. Your own body bears the scars of his malevolence. Would you prefer I had left him to continue his reign of terror?" All Might had no immediate answer for that. He looked around the clearing, at the perfect tunnel cut through the forest by Izuku's attack, at the smooth ground where All for One had been erased from existence. "The students are safe?" he asked finally. Izuku nodded. "The League members have been neutralized and are likely in custody by now. All for One was their primary support. Without him, they pose a significantly reduced threat." All Might sighed deeply. "This will have consequences, young Midoriya, when the public learns what happened here." "They won't," Izuku interrupted. "There were no witnesses. No evidence remains of All for One's existence. His body has been completely erased at the molecular level. Even if I stated exactly what occurred, there would be nothing to verify my account." The former symbol of peace studied him with troubled eyes. "You've thought this through rather thoroughly for someone who claims to seek redemption through heroism." "Redemption doesn't require naivety," Izuku replied. "All for One represented a threat beyond conventional containment. You know this better than anyone. My intervention protected countless future victims, including my classmates who were directly targeted because of his interest in me." All Might was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his gaunt features. Finally, he nodded once, a gesture of reluctant acceptance rather than approval. "What's done is done," he said quietly. "Come, the others are worried about you." As they walked back through the forest toward the evacuation point, All Might glanced sideways at his student. That transformation, the pink hair and aura, what was that? Super Saiyan Rose, Izuku answered. A divine transformation that channels godly ki through a mortal vessel. In my previous existence, I used it to devastating effect across multiple universes. Could others learn this power? All Might asked hesitantly. Izuku shook his head. No, it requires divine essence, which no mortal in this world possesses. It is unique to me, at least in this universe. All Might nodded, seeming simultaneously relieved and troubled by this information. Perhaps that's for the best. The aftermath of the training camp attack unfolded in ways neither Izuku nor the UA faculty could have fully anticipated. With most of the League of Villains in police custody and their mysterious benefactor nowhere to be found, the media narrative focused on the successful defense of the students and the efficiency with which the villains had been neutralized. What remained unexplained was the fate of All for One. Police investigations found no trace of the ancient villain, despite intelligence suggesting he had been in the forest that night. Conspiracy theories flourished in the absence of concrete information. Some claimed he had fled the country, others that he had gone into hiding, and a few fringe sources suggested he had been eliminated by a secret government program. Only a handful of individuals knew the truth. All Might, who had witnessed the aftermath, Aizawa, who had been briefed by the former symbol of peace, Principal Nezu, whose intelligence demanded full disclosure, and Gran Torino, whose decades-long hunt for All for One deserved closure. For Izuku, the elimination of All for One represented a significant milestone in his development as this world's protector. He had faced a being of genuine malevolence, not merely misguided or desperate, but fundamentally corrupt, and had removed that threat without hesitation or mercy. Yet he had done so with precision, ensuring no collateral damage or innocent casualties. In the weeks following the incident, UA implemented enhanced security measures, moving students into on-campus dormitories to provide better protection. Izuku's mother, Inko, was offered special accommodations nearby, which she accepted after expressing appropriate concern about her son's safety during the villain attack. "I heard it was awful," she said one evening as they shared dinner in Izuku's dorm room. "The news said villains targeted you specifically." Izuku nodded, carefully selecting his words. "They did, but they underestimated me, as most do." Inko studied her son, her eyes filled with maternal concern mixed with something deeper, an understanding that transcended ordinary parental worry. "You eliminated someone important, didn't you?" "I can sense it." Even after all these years, his mother's perceptiveness continued to surprise him. "Yes," he admitted. "A villain called All for One, the true leader behind the League, and a being who had caused suffering for generations." Rather than expressing horror or disappointment, Inko simply nodded. "Was there no other way?" "No," Izuku answered honestly. "He was beyond conventional containment, and his continued existence threatened everyone around me." Inko reached across the table to take his hand, a simple, human gesture that still held profound meaning for her reincarnated god of a son. "Then you did what was necessary to protect. That's what matters." In her acceptance, Izuku found the validation that All Might's troubled acquiescence had not provided. His mother understood, as she always had, that divine judgment sometimes required finality that mortal justice systems could not achieve. "Thank you," he said quietly, squeezing her hand gently, "for understanding." The new dormitory arrangements created interesting dynamics among Class 1A. Forced proximity bred both closer friendships and heightened tensions, with Izuku occupying a unique position in the social hierarchy. His classmates respected his power and had witnessed his willingness to protect them, yet many remained wary of his detached demeanor and the ease with which he handled situations that left others struggling. Uraraka, however, continued to approach him with genuine warmth, seemingly undeterred by either his divine nature or his growing reputation. "Hey, Izuku," she called one afternoon, finding him reading alone in the common area. "A bunch of us are going to watch a movie tonight. Want to join?" Izuku looked up from his book, a treatise on hero ethics he'd been studying to better understand this world's moral frameworks. "What kind of movie?" "It's a classic hero film from before quirks were common," she explained enthusiastically. "Ida says it's important for our cultural education as future heroes or something like that." She mimicked Ida's formal speaking style with good-natured amusement. Izuku considered declining, as he often did with social activities he deemed unnecessary. But something in Uraraka's hopeful expression gave him pause. These interactions, while seemingly trivial, were part of the human experience he was attempting to understand in his quest for redemption. "Very well," he agreed. "I'll join you." Uraraka's face lit up with genuine delight. "Great!" 8 o'clock in the main room. "I'll save you a seat." As she bounded away, Izuku returned to his reading, though with slightly less concentration than before. These mortals, with their simple pleasures and genuine emotions, continued to surprise him. In his previous existence, he had dismissed such beings as unworthy of divine attention. Now he found himself increasingly curious about the complexity beneath their seemingly straightforward lives. That evening, as Izuku joined his classmates for the movie, he noticed subtle changes in how they interacted with him. The fear that had been evident after USJ had evolved into a more nuanced respect. They still gave him space, still watched him with caution when discussions became heated, but they no longer flinched at his approach or fell silent when he entered a room. Progress, he thought, as he took the seat Uraraka had saved beside her. Slow, but measurable. The film itself was a simplistic portrayal of heroism from before the era of quirks. A caped figure with extraordinary abilities saving ordinary humans from various disasters and villains. What caught Izuku's attention wasn't the outdated special effects or melodramatic dialogue, but his classmates' reactions to the narrative. They cheered when the hero saved innocent bystanders. They tensed during confrontations with the main villain. They debated the ethics of certain decisions during quiet moments. And most interestingly, they criticized the hero when he seemed to prioritize capturing the villain over protecting civilians. "See, that's not what a real hero would do," Kirishima commented during one such scene. "You always save people first, then worry about the bad guys." "Unless letting the villain escape means more people get hurt later," Todoroki countered thoughtfully. "Sometimes the calculus isn't that simple." "That's why teams are so important," Yaoyorozu added. "Different heroes can handle different priorities simultaneously." Izuku absorbed these perspectives, recognizing the complex moral framework his classmates were developing, a far cry from his former black and white view of mortal worth. Perhaps this, more than anything, was why All Might had been so troubled by his elimination of All for One. It wasn't just the act itself, but what it represented. A unilateral judgment that bypassed the collaborative ethical system these young heroes were being taught to uphold. When the movie ended and the group dispersed to their rooms, Uraraka lingered behind, studying Izuku with curious eyes. "You were really quiet during the whole film," she observed. "Didn't you like it?" "It was educational," Izuku replied truthfully, though not in the way Ida likely intended. She tilted her head, waiting for him to elaborate. When he didn't immediately continue, she prompted gently, "In what way, then?" Izuku considered how to express concepts that had taken him centuries to misconstrue, and was only now beginning to reconsider. The hero in the film operated alone, making unilateral decisions about who to save and how to handle threats. Your discussions highlighted the limitations of that approach. Uraraka nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I guess real heroism is more complicated than old movies make it seem. It's not just about having the power to help, it's about making the right choices with that power." The simplicity and wisdom of her statement struck Izuku profoundly. In his previous existence, he had possessed nearly unlimited power, but had made catastrophically wrong choices in its application. Now, with perhaps even greater power at his disposal in this mortal form, he was learning, slowly, imperfectly, to make better choices. "You're very perceptive, Uraraka," he said finally. She blushed slightly at the unexpected compliment. "Not really. I just think about this stuff a lot. When you're not that powerful, you have to be smart about how you help people." Another insight he had missed in his arrogance as Zamasu, that limitations could breed wisdom rather than merely frustration. These mortals, constrained by their finite existence and powers, had developed ethical frameworks more sophisticated than those of the gods who had judged them. As Uraraka bid him good night and headed to her room, Izuku remained in the common area, contemplating this revelation. Perhaps his redemption wasn't merely about using divine power to protect rather than destroy. Perhaps it was also about learning from those he had once deemed unworthy of existence. The remaining months of the school year brought new challenges and opportunities for growth. UA's annual cultural festival provided a different kind of test for Izuku, one that involved cooperation and creativity rather than combat. Class 1A decided to perform a musical showcase, with each student contributing according to their talents. "What can you do, Izuku?" Uraraka asked during planning sessions. Besides, the whole godly power thing. Izuku considered the question seriously. In his previous existence as Zamasu, he had studied various divine arts, including certain forms of music considered appropriate for celestial beings, but those would likely be incomprehensible to mortal ears. "I can play piano," he offered instead, recalling skills his current body had learned before his divine memories had fully awakened. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was younger." "Perfect!" Jiro, the music-oriented student leading the performance planning, exclaimed, "We needed a pianist. Can you sight read, or will you need time to practice?" "I can sight read," Izuku confirmed. The precision required for manipulating divine ki made reading and executing musical notation trivially simple by comparison. The weeks of preparation for the festival created yet another shift in Izuku's relationship with his classmates. Working together toward a non-combat goal, focusing on creation rather than destruction or even protection, provided common ground that transcended power differentials. When the day of the performance arrived, Izuku took his position at the piano, his hands moving with divine precision across the keys as his classmates sang and played their respective instruments. The harmony they created together, imperfect by cosmic standards but genuine in its emotional resonance, affected him in unexpected ways. For a brief moment, as the final chord resolved and the audience erupted in applause, Izuku felt something he had never experienced as Zamasu: belonging. Not as a god among mortals, not as a superior being deigning to protect lesser creatures, but one part of a collaborative whole. The feeling was fleeting but profound, leaving him momentarily disoriented as he rose from the piano bench to join his classmates for their final bow. "That was amazing, Izuku," Uraraka exclaimed as they left the stage. "I had no idea you could play like that." "You were quite proficient," Ida agreed, adjusting his glasses with characteristic precision. "Your technical execution was flawless." "Thank you," Izuku replied, still processing the emotional response the performance had evoked. "It was enjoyable." Kirishima threw an arm around his shoulders, a gesture of camaraderie that would have been unthinkable months earlier. "See? There's more to life than just training and fighting villains. Sometimes you gotta just have fun, Fun. Another concept that had been meaningless to him as Zamasu. Divine beings didn't seek fun. They fulfilled their purpose with solemn dedication. Yet here he was, a reincarnated god, experiencing satisfaction from creating music with mortals he had once deemed unworthy of existence. Perhaps this, too, was part of his redemption. As the first year at UA drew to a close, the remnants of the League of Villains remained surprisingly quiet. With their leader permanently eliminated and many members in custody, their threat level had been significantly downgraded by hero agencies and law enforcement alike. This relative peace allowed the final event of the year, the end-of-term exams, to proceed without incident. The practical portion pitted students against teachers in scenarios designed to test both their combat abilities and their strategic thinking. Izuku was paired with Mineta, whose perverted tendencies and general cowardice made him perhaps the least compatible partner possible. Their opponent was Principal Nezu himself, whose superintelligence and strategic genius were meant to offset his physical limitations. "This is so unfair," Mineta whined as they prepared for the exam. "We have to fight the principal? He's like super smart. How are we supposed to beat someone who can predict our every move?" Izuku regarded his diminutive partner calmly. "Intelligence has limitations, just as power does. Nezu can predict probable actions based on available information, but he cannot account for abilities he doesn't fully understand. So what? We just wing it and hope he can't predict random stuff?" Mineta asked skeptically. "No," Izuku replied. "We use my abilities in ways he cannot anticipate because they operate on principles beyond his frame of reference." The exam began with Nezu operating a wrecking ball machine, systematically destroying the urban testing ground to limit movement options and create unpredictable hazards. It was a classic strategy to control the battlefield while gathering data on his opponent's reactions. Mineta immediately panicked, throwing his sticky balls randomly to try to create escape routes from the falling debris. We're gonna die. We're gonna fail. Midoriya, do something. Izuku assessed the situation with divine calm. Nezu's strategy was intelligent for dealing with conventional quirk users, but it failed to account for divine capabilities. With a simple gesture, Izuku created a barrier of energy around himself and Mineta, protecting them from the falling debris. Whoa, Mineta stammered, staring at the purple energy field that deflected a massive concrete slab. That's not in your quirk registry. No, Izuku agreed. It isn't. Lifting Mineta with one arm, Izuku flew above the destruction, bypassing the carefully constructed obstacle course entirely. Nezu, visible in the control booth of his wrecking machine, showed genuine surprise at this approach, confirming Izuku's theory that the principal had planned for ground-based movement. Listen carefully, Izuku instructed Mineta as they hovered above the testing ground. I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, use your sticky balls to immobilize Nezu. The exam objective is capture, not defeat. But how will I get close enough? Mineta asked, still visibly terrified despite their relative safety above the destruction. I'll handle that part, Izuku assured him. Just be ready to act when the opportunity comes. Without waiting for further discussion, Izuku projected a controlled energy beam at the wrecking machine's power source, disabling it with surgical precision. As the machine ground to a halt, he flew directly to the control booth, depositing Mineta on its roof before hovering in front of the window to face Nezu directly. The principal's intelligent eyes widened slightly, the only indication of his surprise at this direct approach. He immediately began activating secondary systems, but Izuku had anticipated this, using small energy projections to disable each control panel as Nezu reached for it. Principal Nezu, Izuku called through the glass, this confrontation is unnecessary. Your strategy was based on incomplete information about my capabilities. Perhaps, Nezu replied, his voice carrying through the booth's communication system, or perhaps I'm gathering that information now for future reference. Izuku nodded in acknowledgement of the principal's strategic thinking. A valid approach. However, this exam ends now. With precise timing, Izuku created a brief flash of light that temporarily blinded Nezu. Not harmful, but disorienting enough to create the opening he needed. Simultaneously, he used a controlled energy pulse to pop the hatch on the booth's roof, allowing Mineta to drop inside. The diminutive student, for once acting with decisive courage, immediately threw several sticky balls that adhered to Nezu's fur, immobilizing the principal against his control chair. Capture complete, Izuku announced as he entered through the disabled window. Exam objective achieved. Nezu, despite being thoroughly defeated, smiled with genuine pleasure. Most impressive, Midoriya. Your strategic application of overwhelming power shows remarkable restraint and consideration for the exam parameters. The principal turned his gaze to Mineta, who was trembling slightly despite their victory. And you, young Mineta, executed your role perfectly when given the opportunity. Well done, both of you. You pass with flying colors. As they exited the testing ground, Mineta looked up at Izuku with newfound respect mixed with his usual fear. You could have just won that by yourself in like 2 seconds. Why did you bother including me at all? Izuku considered the question seriously. Because that wasn't the point of the exam. We were being tested not just on our ability to win, but on our ability to work together toward a common goal. Individual power, no matter how great, is not the sole measure of a hero. Mineta stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's actually pretty cool of you, Midoriya. It was, Izuku realized, another step in his redemption, using his power not to dominate or overwhelm, but to create opportunities for others to contribute meaningfully. Zamasu would have dismissed Mineta as worthless, a weak mortal with a trivial ability. Izuku Midoriya had found value in his partnership, limited though it might be. The passing of final exams marked the official end of their first year at UA. As students prepared for summer break, there was a palpable sense of accomplishment, mixed with anticipation for what the second year might bring. For Class 1A, who had faced villain attacks, intense training, and public scrutiny beyond what any first-year students should encounter, the bond they had formed transcended ordinary classroom camaraderie. On the final day, as students exchanged contact information and summer plans, All Might requested a private meeting with Izuku in his office. The former symbol of peace had continued to decline physically throughout the year, his muscled form now sustainable for only brief periods. Young Midoriya, All Might began once they were alone. I wanted to speak with you before the break, about your progress this year, and about what happened in the forest. Izuku nodded, having expected this conversation eventually. All for one. Yes, All Might's sunken eyes held a complexity of emotions, grief, relief, moral uncertainty. It's been 6 months now, no sign of him anywhere, no body, no evidence of his continued existence, just gone. As I intended, Izuku confirmed without apology, his threat has been permanently eliminated. All Might sighed deeply. I've had time to reflect on that night, on what you did and why. And while I still believe there should have been another way. He paused, seeming to wrestle with his own thoughts. I cannot deny that his absence has allowed countless people to live in safety who might otherwise have suffered. It was as close to approval as All Might would ever come regarding Izuku's divine judgment of all for one. The hero's moral framework, while flexible enough to acknowledge the practical benefits of the villain's elimination, could never fully embrace the unilateral execution that had achieved it. You've grown this year, young Midoriya, All Might continued after a moment. Not in power, you already possessed more than enough of that, but in understanding. I've watched you learn to work with your classmates, to restrain your abilities appropriately, to find value in cooperation rather than mere dominance. Izuku inclined his head slightly. I came to UA seeking redemption. Learning to be a hero by this world's standards is part of that journey. And have you found it? All Might asked quietly. Redemption? The question gave Izuku pause. Had he? In his previous existence, he had judged entire civilizations unworthy and acted as their executioner. The scale of that genocide was cosmic, beyond comprehension. Could saving one world, protecting one group of mortals truly balance that cosmic scale? I don't know, he answered honestly. Perhaps redemption isn't something that can be fully achieved, not for the magnitude of my past actions. Perhaps it's an ongoing process, a path rather than a destination. All Might nodded, surprising Izuku with a small, genuine smile. That, young Midoriya, is perhaps the most heroic thing I've ever heard you say. The second year at UA began with significant changes to the Hero Course curriculum. Following the incidents of the previous year, the faculty had implemented a more intensive training regimen focused on real-world crisis response and team operations. Class 1A, now designated as Class 2A, found themselves regularly paired with upperclassmen and pro-heroes for joint exercises that simulated complex emergency scenarios. For Izuku, these exercises provided valuable experience in coordinating his divine abilities with mortal teammates, a skill that would have seemed pointless to him as Zamasu, but now represented an important aspect of his hero development. He learned to modulate his power output to complement rather than overshadow his partners, to create opportunities for others to utilize their quirks effectively, and to communicate tactical information gathered through his enhanced senses. During one such exercise, paired with Todoroki and a third-year student named Mirio Togata, Izuku demonstrated this growth in dramatic fashion. The scenario involved rescuing civilians from a collapsed building while defending against simulated villain attacks, a complex challenge requiring both power and precision. Midoriya, what can you sense inside? Mirio asked as they approached the training facility. The third-year student, known for his intangibility quirk and cheerful demeanor, had quickly adapted to Izuku's unusual abilities. Izuku extended his divine senses, perceiving energy signatures through the reinforced concrete walls. 12 civilian targets distributed across 3 floors. 4 automated villain units patrolling predetermined routes. Structural integrity compromised on the eastern side, collapse imminent within approximately 5 minutes. Todoroki raised an eyebrow. Your sensory range has improved. Not improved, Izuku corrected. Just less restrained. I'm allowing more of my natural abilities to manifest. Mirio grinned broadly. Well, that's super useful. Here's what I'm thinking. Todoroki, you create ice supports for the eastern section to buy us time. I'll phase through to the upper floors to begin evacuation. Midoriya, you handle the ground floor and neutralize the villain units. The plan was sound, utilizing each of their strengths without relying exclusively on Izuku's overwhelming power. A year ago, he might have simply dismantled the entire scenario himself, seeing no value in mortal contribution. Now, he nodded in agreement. Efficient. Let's proceed. As they executed the plan, Izuku found himself appreciating the elegance of their coordination. Todoroki's ice created not just structural support, but evacuation slides for civilians. Mirio's phasing ability allowed him to reach trapped individuals without further destabilizing the building, and Izuku, while easily capable of handling the entire scenario alone, focused on creating safe pathways for his teammates and the evacuees while neutralizing threats with minimal force. When the exercise concluded with all civilians rescued and threats neutralized, their instructor, the blood hero Vlad King, offered rare praise. Excellent work, all three of you. Particularly impressive was your restraint, Midoriya. You supported your teammates without overshadowing them. Izuku accepted the assessment with a slight nod. They're capable heroes. My role was to enhance their effectiveness, not replace their functions. Mirio laughed, slapping Izuku on the back with characteristic exuberance. That's what teamwork is all about. Even with all your power, there are things Todoroki and I can do that complement your abilities. Together, we're stronger than the sum of our parts. It was a concept that would have been foreign to Zamasu, who had viewed mortals as inherently flawed and unworthy of divine cooperation. Yet here was empirical evidence that combined mortal and divine effort could achieve results neither could accomplish alone with the same efficiency. Another lesson in redemption. As the semester progressed, Izuku noticed subtle changes in how the faculty approached his training. Rather than attempting to constrain his power, a futile endeavor given its divine nature, they instead focused on expanding his tactical thinking and ethical framework. Principal Nezu himself conducted special seminars on crisis ethics and the philosophy of heroism, sessions that often involved complex moral scenarios without clear correct answers. The trolley problem is a classic ethical dilemma, Nezu explained during one such session, which included not just Izuku but several other students identified as having high-impact quirks that could cause significant collateral damage if misused. Do you divert the trolley to save 5 lives at the cost of 1? Or do you refuse to act, allowing 5 to die but keeping your hands clean of direct intervention? Todoroki, who had been included in these special sessions, frowned thoughtfully. Wouldn't the heroic choice always be to save the most lives possible? Perhaps, Nezu acknowledged, but what if the one person is a child? What if the 5 are convicted criminals? What if diverting the trolley creates a precedent that leads to greater harm in the future? These variables change the calculus, Izuku observed. The immediate life count becomes just one factor among many to consider. Nezu nodded, his intelligent eyes fixed on Izuku. Precisely. And for someone with your level of power, Midoriya, these calculations become even more consequential. A decision you make in an instant could have ramifications that extend for generations. It was, Izuku realized, a direct reference to his elimination of All for One, an action taken unilaterally based on his divine judgment of the villain's irredeemable nature. While the immediate result had been positive, the removal of a centuries-old threat, the principal was suggesting that the precedent itself carried potential consequences. You're concerned about establishing a pattern of unilateral judgment, Izuku stated, cutting to the heart of the matter. Nezu's whiskers twitched in what might have been approval of his directness. Power without accountability has historically led to problematic outcomes, regardless of initial intentions. Even, perhaps especially, when that power is wielded by those who believe themselves to be acting in others' best interests. The parallel to his actions as Zamasu was unmistakable. He had eliminated mortal civilizations, believing himself to be implementing divine justice for the greater cosmic good. The path from righteous protector to unaccountable executioner was one he had already traveled once. I understand your concern, Izuku acknowledged, and I recognize the pattern you're highlighting. Nezu seemed satisfied with this response. Awareness of the pattern is the first step toward avoiding its repetition. Now, let's consider another scenario. These philosophical discussions continued throughout the semester, gradually expanding to include practical applications during training exercises. Izuku found himself presented with increasingly complex scenarios that forced him to balance his overwhelming power against moral considerations, collateral damage assessments, and the psychological impact of his actions on both civilians and other heroes. During one particularly challenging exercise, Izuku was tasked with resolving a hostage situation where the villain threatened to detonate explosives if approached. The scenario was designed to prevent simple, power-based solutions. Any direct attack risked triggering the explosives, while inaction allowed the threat to continue. After careful consideration, Izuku employed a technique he had rarely used since his reincarnation, a spatial manipulation that allowed him to create a localized distortion around the explosives, containing their potential blast within a pocket dimension. With the immediate threat neutralized, he was then able to approach the villain directly and neutralize him without endangering the hostages. An innovative solution, Recovery Girl commented as she observed the exercise. Though I note you used an ability that isn't listed in any of your quirk registrations. Izuku nodded. Spatial manipulation is an advanced application of Divine Ki. I've avoided using it previously to maintain the fiction of having a conventional quirk. Why employ it now? She asked, her experienced eyes studying him with clinical interest. Because the scenario required it, Izuku replied simply. Protecting the hostages while neutralizing both the villain and the explosives demanded a solution beyond conventional quirk applications. Recovery Girl hummed thoughtfully. You're becoming more comfortable revealing the true extent of your abilities. It wasn't a question, but Izuku answered nonetheless. Yes, maintaining artificial limitations serves no purpose if it prevents optimal protection. My goal is redemption through protection, not conformity to mortal expectations. Just be mindful of how others perceive such abilities, she cautioned. What seems necessary to you may appear excessive or frightening to those unfamiliar with divine power. Her warning was prescient. As training exercises became more public, often conducted in specialized facilities that allowed for civilian observation, Izuku's more exotic abilities began to attract attention beyond UA's controlled environment. Hero analysis blogs documented his techniques, comparing them to known quirks and finding them defying conventional classification. Underground forums speculated about his true power level, with some suggesting he might rival All Might at his peak. And inevitably, government agencies began to take note of a student whose abilities seemed to transcend established quirk science. This scrutiny came to a head midway through the second year, when representatives from the Hero Public Safety Commission requested a meeting with Principal Nezu regarding Izuku's quirk registration discrepancies. They're concerned about the gap between your registered abilities and what you've demonstrated, Nezu explained to Izuku in his office, where All Might and Aizawa were also present. Quirk registration laws require accurate disclosure for public safety reasons. My abilities aren't a quirk, Izuku reminded them. Divine Ki doesn't conform to quirk factor genetics or limitations. A distinction that would be difficult to explain within existing legal frameworks, Nezu replied diplomatically. The Commission operates on the assumption that all superhuman abilities in our society are quirks with corresponding regulatory structures. All Might leaned forward, his gaunt face serious. What the principal is saying, young Midoriya, is that claiming divine origin for your powers would create a regulatory nightmare. It might even lead to demands for special oversight or restrictions on your hero activities. Izuku considered this information calmly. So you recommend continuing the fiction that I possess an exceptionally versatile energy manipulation quirk? For now, yes, Nezu confirmed. We've prepared an updated quirk registry that includes the abilities you've demonstrated publicly, categorized under advanced energy manipulation with several subclassifications. It's still an oversimplification, but it should satisfy the Commission's immediate concerns. Aizawa, who had remained silent until now, fixed Izuku with his perpetually tired eyes. This isn't just about bureaucratic compliance. There are elements within the Commission who view exceptional power as a potential threat rather than an asset. All Might experienced similar scrutiny at his peak. Indeed, the former symbol of peace confirmed. My public persona was carefully crafted to make my power seem approachable and non-threatening, despite its overwhelming nature. Your divine abilities, if fully disclosed, might trigger security protocols designed for quirks classified as potentially catastrophic. The implication was clear. In this society built around quirk regulation, powers that defied classification could be viewed as inherently dangerous. Izuku's divine nature, if officially acknowledged, might lead to restrictions on his freedom to act as a hero. I understand, he said finally. I'll support the updated registry and continue to present my abilities within the framework you've established. Nezu nodded, seeming relieved. Thank you, Midoriya. I believe this approach best serves both your goal of redemption through heroism and the stability of the society you wish to protect. As Izuku left the meeting, he reflected on this latest compromise with mortal systems. As Zamasu, he would have dismissed such regulations as presumptuous, mortals attempting to constrain divine power through bureaucratic means. But as Izuku Midoriya, hero in training, he recognized the value of working within established structures when possible. Redemption didn't require conformity, but neither did it justify unnecessary disruption of the society he sought to protect. The updated quirk registry temporarily satisfied the Hero Commission's inquiries, allowing Izuku to continue his hero studies without additional scrutiny. However, the incident highlighted a growing tension between his divine nature and the mortal systems within which he operated, a tension that would be tested sooner than anyone anticipated. The catalyst came during what should have been a routine work-study assignment with the Dragoon hero, Ryukyu. Izuku, along with Uraraka and Tsuyu from his class, had been assisting the pro-hero with standard patrols when they encountered an unusual villain attack in downtown Musutafu. The villain, later identified as 8 Precepts of Death member Rikiya Katsukame, possessed a quirk that allowed him to absorb the vitality of others to enhance his already formidable strength. When Ryukyu's team intercepted him fleeing from a bank robbery, he immediately began draining energy from nearby civilians, growing to monstrous proportions. Midoriya, Uraraka, evacuate the civilians, Ryukyu commanded as she transformed into her dragon form. Tsuyu, support me in containing the villain. Uraraka immediately began using her zero-gravity quirk to move injured civilians away from the battle zone, while Tsuyu used her frog-like agility to rescue those trapped in damaged buildings. Izuku assisted with the evacuation, his divine speed allowing him to move multiple people to safety in seconds. The situation seemed under control until Katsukame landed a devastating blow on Ryukyu, sending the dragon hero crashing through a building that had just been evacuated. As the structure began to collapse, the villain turned his attention to the fleeing civilians, his quirk reaching out to drain more vitality. More power, he roared, his already massive form swelling further as he absorbed energy from those too slow to escape. Give me more. Izuku assessed the situation instantly. Ryukyu was temporarily incapacitated, Tsuyu was occupied with rescuing trapped civilians from the collapsing building, and Uraraka couldn't affect a villain of Katsukame's size with her quirk. The villain was actively draining life force from innocent bystanders, causing visible harm with each passing second. In that moment, divine judgment aligned perfectly with heroic necessity. Moving with controlled divine speed, Izuku appeared directly before Katsukame, interrupting the villain's quirk activation with his presence alone. The rose-pink aura of Super Saiyan Rose manifested subtly, not the full transformation, but enough to infuse his voice with divine authority. That's enough, he stated simply. Katsukame blinked in momentary confusion, then laughed, reaching for Izuku with his massive hand. More power for me. The villain's quirk activated, attempting to drain Izuku's energy, only to encounter divine ki that didn't merely resist absorption but actively repelled the quirk's effect. Katsukame recoiled as if burned, his expression shifting from confidence to shock. "What the hell are you?" he demanded, cradling his hand where contact with divine energy had caused visible damage. Izuku didn't bother responding to the question. Instead, he extended one hand and released a precisely calculated energy pulse, enough to completely neutralize the villain's enhanced strength without causing lethal damage. The force struck Katsukame directly, reverting his body to normal size as the stolen energy dissipated. Before the villain could recover, Izuku moved again, delivering a series of pressure point strikes that paralyzed Katsukame's limbs while leaving him conscious and able to breathe. The entire confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds, transitioning from imminent catastrophe to complete neutralization with efficiency that left civilian witnesses stunned. As Ryukyu recovered and police arrived to take Katsukame into custody, news crews converged on the scene. The villain's high-profile status and the dramatic nature of the confrontation guaranteed media attention, with reporters eager to interview the UA, student who had so efficiently neutralized a dangerous threat. "That was incredible, Izuku," Uraraka said as they regrouped, using the hero name Izuku had adopted during their first-year internships. "You didn't even seem to exert yourself." "Because he didn't," Tsuyu observed with her characteristic directness. "Katsukame never stood a chance, did he?" Izuku shook his head slightly. "No. His quirk attempted to drain divine ki, which rejected the connection and backfired on him. In fact, the outcome was inevitable once he targeted me." Ryukyu, having reverted to her human form, approached with a troubled expression. "Midoriya, the media is requesting statements. Given the high-profile nature of this incident, we should coordinate our response." Before they could discuss further, a familiar voice called out from behind the police line. "Young Midoriya, a moment, please." All Might, in his skeletal form, was beckoning urgently. Excusing himself, Izuku approached his mentor, noting the concern evident in the former hero's sunken eyes. "There's been a development," All Might said quietly once Izuku was within earshot. "The villain you apprehended, he's connected to a larger organization called the 8 Precepts of Death. Their leader, Overhaul, has been on Hero Agency's radar for months." "I'm aware of the group," Izuku confirmed. "Yakuza remnants attempting to establish a new power base in the void left by All for One's disappearance." All Might nodded grimly. "What you don't know is that they've developed a new weapon, a quirk-destroying bullet. Intelligence suggests Overhaul has been experimenting on a young girl to harvest her quirk factor for these weapons." Izuku's expression didn't change, but the temperature around him dropped noticeably as his divine ki responded to his internal reaction. "A child experimented on to create weapons that destroy quirks?" "Yes," All Might confirmed, eyeing the frost forming on nearby surfaces with concern. "A raid is being planned, but it's complex. The Precepts compound is a maze, heavily guarded, and the girl's exact location is unknown." "You're telling me this because—" Izuku prompted, though he already suspected the answer. "Because I know you, young Midoriya," All Might replied quietly. "News of Katsukame's capture will reach Overhaul quickly. He may accelerate his plans or move the girl, and given your perspective on those who harm children, I thought it best you hear this officially rather than piecing it together yourself." It was a surprisingly nuanced approach from All Might, neither explicitly encouraging intervention nor attempting to prevent it, but ensuring Izuku had accurate information before making his own judgment. "I appreciate your transparency," Izuku said after a moment. "When is the official raid scheduled?" 3 days from now. The Hero Commission is coordinating with multiple agencies to ensure sufficient force without tipping our hand." Izuku absorbed this information silently. 3 days of continued experimentation on a child. 3 days during which Overhaul might relocate her or accelerate his abuse to extract more quirk factor before being discovered. "I understand," he said finally. "Thank you for the information." All Might studied him intently. "What will you do with it, young Midoriya?" Izuku met his mentor's gaze directly. "What do you think I should do?" It was a genuine question, not a challenge or deflection, but an acknowledgement that All Might's moral perspective had value even if it differed from divine judgment. The former symbol of peace sighed deeply. "As a hero who operated within the system for decades, I should tell you to wait for the official raid, to trust the process and the combined strength of legitimate hero operations." He paused, conflict evident in his gaunt features. "But as someone who has held a crying child and promised to save them, I understand that systems sometimes move too slowly for those suffering right now." It was as close to sanction as All Might would ever give for unsanctioned intervention. Izuku nodded once, a gesture of understanding and respect. "I should rejoin my work study team," he said. "Ryukyu will want to coordinate our media response." As he turned to leave, All Might spoke once more, his voice barely audible. Whatever you decide, remember that saving is the essence of heroism. Not destroying, not punishing, but saving. Izuku paused momentarily, then continued walking, those words echoing in his mind. Saving, not destroying. Protection, not punishment. The core of redemption he had been pursuing since his rebirth. That evening, after completing the work-study shift and providing a carefully scripted statement to the media about team coordination and quirk synergy that downplayed his individual role, Izuku returned to UA's dormitories. Rather than joining his classmates in the common area, he went directly to his room, closing the door behind him. Seated in lotus position on the floor, he extended his divine senses to their maximum range, searching for specific energy signatures. The 8 precepts compound would be shielded from conventional detection, but divine perception operated on principles beyond mortal concealment. It took nearly an hour of methodical scanning before he found what he sought, a small, flickering life force surrounded by corrupted energies. The signature was distinctive, a quirk factor being forcibly extracted and manipulated, causing waves of pain that distorted the child's natural energy pattern. Izuku opened his eyes, his decision made. Rising to his feet, he changed from his school uniform into a simplified version of his hero costume, dark clothing without distinctive markings or his usual support items. This wasn't an official hero operation, it was divine intervention. As he prepared to depart, a soft knock came at his door. Opening it, he found Uraraka standing in the hallway, concern evident in her expression. "Hey, Izuku," she said, her voice unusually subdued. "I just wanted to check if you're okay. You seemed different after talking to All Might today." Izuku studied her for a moment, appreciating the genuine concern behind her inquiry. In his former existence, he would have dismissed such mortal worry as inconsequential. Now he recognized it as a valuable connection, one worth honesty, if not complete disclosure. "I'm fine," he assured her, "but there's something I need to take care of tonight, something important." Her eyes widened slightly as she took in his changed attire and serious demeanor. "Hero work, but we're not supposed to operate without supervision or proper authorization." "This isn't conventional hero work," Izuku explained carefully. "It's a rescue that can't wait for official channels." Understanding dawned in her expression. "The villain today, he's connected to something bigger, isn't he?" "Something bad." Izuku nodded, impressed by her perceptiveness. "A child is being hurt. I'm going to stop it." Instead of trying to dissuade him or insisting on proper procedures, Uraraka simply asked, "Do you need help?" The offer surprised him, not just the willingness to assist, but the implicit trust that his unsanctioned mission was justified. It was another reminder of how far he had come in earning his classmates' confidence. "Thank you," he said genuinely. "But this requires abilities that only I possess. The fewer people involved, the safer the extraction will be." She nodded, though concern remained evident in her expression. "Just come back safely, okay? And if you need backup, call us. That's what friends are for." Friends. Another concept that would have been meaningless to Zamasu but had become increasingly significant to Izuku Midoriya. These mortals, with their limited lifespans and fragile bodies, had forged connections with him that transcended power differentials. "I will," he promised. "And Uraraka, thank you for caring." With that, he stepped past her and made his way to the dormitory roof. Once certain he was unobserved, he took to the air, flying swiftly toward the energy signature he had located. The 8 precepts compound was hidden within an unassuming building in an older district of Musutafu, a traditional Japanese structure with modern security systems carefully concealed behind historical facades. To conventional observation, it appeared to be a legitimate business property with perhaps slightly excessive privacy measures. To Izuku's divine senses, it was a fortress designed to conceal atrocities. He hovered high above, beyond visual detection range, mapping the interior through energy signatures alone. Dozens of guards patrolled predetermined routes, their quirks primed for combat. Subterranean levels housed laboratories where corrupted energy signatures suggested ongoing experimentation. And at the deepest level, isolated in a specially reinforced chamber, was the flickering life force of the child. Beside her was another signature, powerful, meticulously controlled, radiating a distinctive pattern that Izuku identified as Overhaul himself. The Yakuza leader's quirk was active, cycling through phases of deconstruction and reconstruction that corresponded with spikes of pain in the child's energy. Divine wrath stirred within Izuku at this confirmation of ongoing torture. As Zamasu, he had judged entire civilizations for far less direct cruelty. The temptation to simply obliterate the entire compound was powerful. A single divine blast would eliminate all threats and end the suffering permanently. But All Might's words echoed in his mind. Saving is the essence of heroism. This mission wasn't about punishment or vengeance, but rescue. The child's safety had to be the priority, with minimal collateral damage to ensure her psychological well-being wasn't further compromised. With this focus clarified, Izuku formulated his approach. Speed and precision would be essential, neutralizing Overhaul before he could harm the child further, while preventing any other Precepts members from interfering with the extraction. Rather than a frontal assault that would trigger alarms and defensive responses, Izuku employed a technique he rarely used: instantaneous movement that bypassed physical space entirely, allowing him to teleport directly to the subterranean chamber where the child was being held. The transition was seamless. Divine key folding space to deposit him directly behind Overhaul. The Yakuza leader, masked and gloved as he conducted his grotesque work, had no warning before Izuku's hand clamped firmly around the back of his neck. "What?" Overhaul began, but his voice cut off as precise pressure to specific nerve clusters paralyzed his body instantly. As the villain collapsed, immobilized but conscious, Izuku turned his attention to the child. She was small, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with long pale hair and a single horn protruding from her forehead. Her tiny body was covered in bandages, and her eyes, red from exhaustion and fear, widened in confusion at the sudden interruption of her torment. "Hello, Eri," Izuku said gently, knowing her name from the intelligence All Might had shared. "I've come to take you away from here. No one will hurt you anymore." The girl stared at him, trembling visibly. "But Overhaul will be angry. He'll hurt you. He hurts everyone." Izuku glanced at the paralyzed villain, then back to Eri. "He can't hurt anyone now, and he will never hurt you again." Moving slowly to avoid frightening her further, Izuku approached the examination table where she was restrained. With careful precision, he dissolved the restraints with minimal energy expenditure, ensuring no accidental harm to her already injured body. "Can you stand?" he asked, keeping his voice soft and non-threatening. Eri tried to push herself up, then winced in pain. "It hurts when I move." Without hesitation, Izuku gathered her into his arms, cradling her with divine gentleness. "Then I'll carry you. Close your eyes for a moment. We're going to move very quickly." As she complied, burying her face against his chest, Izuku extended his senses to map the fastest exit route. The compound's security systems were already responding to the interruption of Overhaul's work, with guards mobilizing toward their location. Rather than fight through them, Izuku once again employed instantaneous movement, teleporting directly to the compound's roof, with Eri safely in his arms. From there, he took to the air, flying swiftly away from the Precepts' headquarters toward a secure location he had predetermined, a small medical facility operated by a retired hero recovery girl for cases requiring discretion. As they soared through the night sky, Eri cautiously opened her eyes, gasping as she realized they were flying. "Are you a bird?" she asked with childlike wonder that somehow survived her ordeal. Despite the gravity of the situation, Izuku found himself smiling slightly at the innocent question. "No, I'm a hero." "Heroes fly?" she asked, her small hands clutching his shirt for security. "Some do," he replied. "But most importantly, heroes protect, and you are protected now, Eri. I promise." The conviction in his voice, divine certainty rather than mere mortal reassurance, seemed to reach her. For perhaps the first time in her short, traumatic life, Eri relaxed slightly, accepting protection as a possibility rather than dismissing it as another cruel deception. Recovery Girl was waiting when they arrived at the discreet facility, alerted by a message Izuku had sent before departing you. Her experienced eyes took in Eri's condition with professional assessment tempered by genuine compassion. "Bring her this way," she directed, leading them to a specially prepared examination room. "I've arranged for everything she'll need." As Izuku gently placed Eri on the examination bed, the girl suddenly grabbed his hand, panic returning to her eyes. "Don't leave me, please." The desperation in her voice stirred something protective within him. Not the abstract divine protection he had offered as Zamasu, but something more personal, more connected to his human existence as Izuku Midoriya. "I won't leave," he promised, squeezing her small hand reassuringly. "I'll stay right here while Recovery Girl helps you." As the retired hero conducted her examination and began treating Eri's injuries, Izuku maintained his position beside the bed, providing the continuity of safety the traumatized child clearly needed. Recovery Girl worked efficiently, her healing quirk accelerated by specialized equipment that minimized the stamina drain on both healer and patient. Multiple extraction wounds, she reported quietly to Izuku as she worked. Evidence of repeated quirk-based deconstruction and reconstruction. Malnutrition. Sleep deprivation. Her experienced voice maintained clinical detachment, but her eyes betrayed her horror at what had been done to the child. "Whoever did this deserves." "He has been neutralized," Izuku interrupted, his tone making it clear that further discussion of Overhaul's fate was unnecessary. "Eri's recovery is what matters now." Recovery Girl nodded, returning her focus to her patient. "She'll need specialized care. Her quirk appears to be rewind-based, extremely powerful but unstable due to the trauma and forced extractions. Physical healing is just the beginning." "Whatever she needs will be provided," Izuku stated with quiet certainty. "I've made arrangements." Those arrangements had been put in place months earlier, after the elimination of All for One. Anticipating that his divine intervention might occasionally create situations requiring specialized handling outside official hero systems, Izuku had established a network of trusted individuals, mostly retired heroes and support specialists who operated with discretion. Funded through anonymous accounts created with a fraction of the resources he had accumulated, this network could provide everything from medical care to secure housing for those who fell through the cracks of conventional hero society. For Eri, it would mean a safe transition from victim to survivor, with her unique quirk managed appropriately while her psychological healing progressed at its own pace. As Recovery Girl completed her initial treatment, Eri drifted into an exhausted sleep, her small hands still clutching Izuku's even in unconsciousness. The elderly hero stepped back, studying both patient and protector with knowing eyes. "You didn't wait for the official raid," she observed without judgment. "She couldn't wait," Izuku replied simply. "Every minute delayed meant more suffering." Recovery Girl nodded. "The Hero Commission won't be pleased about unauthorized intervention. There will be questions, perhaps consequences. Let them question. Let them impose whatever consequences they deem appropriate." Izuku looked down at the sleeping child, her face peaceful, perhaps for the first time in years. This was the right action. "I don't disagree," Recovery Girl said quietly, "but the systems we operate within exist for reasons beyond bureaucratic control. Coordination prevents chaos. Protocols prevent well-intentioned actions from causing unintended harm." "I understand the value of systems," Izuku acknowledged, "but systems must serve their purpose, protection of the innocent, or they become merely self-perpetuating structures that prioritize their own continuation over their original mission." It was perhaps the most direct expression of his evolved perspective since his reincarnation. As Zamasu, he had viewed mortal systems as inherently corrupt and worthy of elimination. Now, he recognized their value while maintaining the divine perspective necessary to judge when those systems failed their essential purpose. Recovery Girl studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've changed since you first came to UA, Midoriya, grown in ways beyond power." "Redemption is growth," Izuku replied simply. "Divine judgment without compassion led me astray in my previous existence. I won't make the same mistake twice." The aftermath of Eri's rescue unfolded in ways that tested this evolving philosophy. As predicted, the Hero Commission reacted strongly to the unauthorized intervention, particularly when it became clear that Overhaul had been left permanently paralyzed from the precise neurological disruption Izuku had inflicted. A special hearing was convened with representatives from UA, the Commission, and law enforcement agencies present. Izuku attended in his student uniform rather than his hero costume, a subtle statement that he was facing judgment as himself rather than in his professional capacity. "Izuku Midoriya," the Commission chairwoman began, her tone formal and severe. You are charged with unauthorized quirk use, vigilante activity, assault resulting in permanent injury, interference with an official hero operation, and potentially compromising an ongoing investigation. How do you respond? Izuku stood before the panel with calm dignity. I acknowledge the actions described. I extracted a child who was being actively tortured from her captor's custody. I neutralized the immediate threat to her safety with minimal force, and I ensured she received appropriate medical care. That is not a denial of the charges, the chairwoman noted. No, Izuku agreed. It is context for why those actions were necessary despite their technical illegality. Principal Nezu, present as UA's representative, cleared his throat. If I may, the circumstances were extraordinary. Intelligence confirmed ongoing torture of a minor, with evidence suggesting acceleration of harmful activities following Katsukame's capture. The official raid was still days away. Procedures exist for expediting operations when new intelligence emerges, the commission representative countered. Proper channels were bypassed entirely, and every hour of delay meant more suffering for a child, Izuku stated, his voice remaining measured despite the subject matter. The injury to Overhaul is non-lethal and specifically targeted to prevent him from using his quirk to harm others. The paralysis affects his motor functions while leaving cognitive abilities intact, ensuring he can stand trial for his crimes. All Might, present in his skeletal form, leaned forward. Young Midoriya's actions, while technically outside protocol, achieved the primary objective of any hero operation, the protection of innocent life. Eri is now safe and recovering, and a significant threat has been neutralized without casualties. The debate continued for hours, with legal representatives arguing procedural violations, while hero agencies presented the successful outcomes. Throughout, Izuku maintained his composed demeanor, neither apologizing for his intervention, nor challenging the commission's authority to review his actions. Finally, after private deliberation, the panel returned with their decision. Izuku Midoriya, the chairwoman announced, while this commission cannot condone unauthorized hero activity, we acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances and positive outcome of your intervention. You will be placed on provisional license probation for 6 months, during which any independent hero activity must be directly supervised by a licensed pro. Additionally, you will complete 40 hours of specialized training in proper procedure and chain of command. She paused, then added with slightly less formality, "Off the record, the child you rescued is recovering well. Her quirk is being properly managed, and her testimony has provided evidence to prosecute not just Overhaul, but his entire organization. Sometimes right actions come through imperfect channels." It was, Izuku recognized, a remarkably balanced response, maintaining the official standards while acknowledging the moral complexity of the situation. The punishment was nominal, designed to emphasize the importance of systems while tacitly approving the outcome. "I accept these terms," he replied with a respectful nod. As the hearing concluded and attendees began to disperse, Detective Tsukuchi approached Izuku quietly. "The paralysis technique you used on Overhaul," he said in a low voice. "Our medical experts say it's unlike anything they've seen. Precise damage to specific neural pathways while leaving others completely intact. Almost surgical in its application." Izuku met the detective's gaze directly. "I studied pressure points and neurological vulnerabilities extensively. Precision prevents unnecessary harm while ensuring threat neutralization." "Indeed." Tsukauchi studied him thoughtfully. "You could have killed him easily. Many would argue he deserved it for what he did to that child." "Perhaps," Izuku acknowledged, "but death would have been an escape from accountability. This way, he lives with the consequences of his actions while being prevented from causing further harm." The detective nodded slowly. An interesting perspective on justice. Not elimination, but contained accountability. "I'm evolving my understanding of appropriate intervention," Izuku explained, thinking of how far he had come from his days as Zamasu, when elimination had been his default response to perceived corruption. Permanent solutions don't always require permanent elimination. It was perhaps the most significant marker of his redemption journey thus far, the ability to render judgment that prioritized protection and accountability over the divine retribution that had once been his only response to evil. Zamasu would have obliterated Overhaul without hesitation. Izuku Midoriya had chosen a more nuanced approach that achieved protection while honoring the value of mortal justice systems. As he left the hearing, All Might fell into step beside him, his expression thoughtful. "You handled that well, young Midoriya. Better than I might have at your age, faced with similar circumstances." "I had good teachers," Izuku replied, glancing at his mentor. "You among them." All Might smiled slightly. "I taught you about heroism, perhaps, but this balance you're developing between divine judgment and human mercy, that's something you're finding on your own path." "Not entirely on my own," Izuku corrected. "My mother showed me unconditional love when I first remembered my divine nature. My classmates demonstrate daily that mortal worth transcends power, and you, All Might, showed me that protection without domination is possible." The former symbol of peace seemed touched by this acknowledgement. "Well, wherever it comes from, this growth suits you. You're becoming not just powerful, but wise, perhaps the most important quality for someone with your level of ability." As they parted ways at Yue's gates, Izuku found himself reflecting on this journey, from divine destroyer to protector, from judge to guardian.
Big shout out to the legends keeping this channel alive. First, standing tall on the front lines, our pro heroes, Tyreek Ba and Javon McGuire. You're the steady force holding the line and pushing the story forward. Next, the unshakable symbols of peace, Rowdy Rich, Bionitarius V, King of the Pirates, Crow, Daniel Sharp, Roberto Ramos de Cristina, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Aiden Schmidt, Mason Edwards, Rayvon Crimson River, Dante Alistar, Fable, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, MJ Brown, Omar Cousin, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Hassasin 24, Howie 60, Ignacio, Albert, Carlos Terran, Rafael Turan, Kevin Hall. Each of you stands as a pillar, keeping the dream alive, keeping this channel burning bright. And above all, the hope of the universe, Nuggy Nug Boy, Juan, M. Calver, Major, and Colsey. You are the peak, the guiding stars, the unstoppable energy that powers this entire journey. Without you, none of this would be possible. From the bottom of my heart, thank you all. You are not just supporters. You are the legends rewriting destiny with me. Then so ends another chapter of divine justice. Thank you for witnessing the legend of Izuku Midoriya. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more divine power in action. Smash that like button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. Until next time, remember, true power protects the innocent. The legend continues.